right, welcome everybody to Standing for Truth. My name is Donny. This is Matt. We are the Creation Bros, and we are here for a live Ask Us Anything on creation, evolution, origins, ancestry. And we're looking forward to this. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. Matt, isn't it a great time to be a biblical creationist, brother?
Absolutely. It just gets easier with time for us. It's amazing.
My question to you is, why is it such a great time to be a biblical creationist?
Because as we update ourselves with new scientific discoveries, they keep confirming prior predictions that were made by the creationists. And they keep confirming what we've believed in the begin with. We would say things like Neanderthals were nothing but regular human beings. Boom. Now all of a sudden, they're no longer a new species or a subhuman species. They match exactly what we've been saying. It's just evolution crumbles more every single day that there's some new discovery. It's amazing.
Absolutely. You're right about that, brother. So if a critic were to say, Matt, you silly creationist, science is about making testable and falsifiable predictions. And you got to test those predictions. They need to be confirmed. And you creationists, you guys don't do that. You're not meeting the gold standard of science. You're not advancing the scientific debate in any meaningful manner. How would you respond, Matt?
I would say it's okay. Your opinion is your opinion, but I would actually investigate the subject that you say is wrong before commenting, because that's just an emotional response and tells me that you don't know anything about the subject whatsoever. You can go look at pull up any prediction that you believe was made by the evolutionary theory that came true. You're going to find a small handful. The rest aren't even predictions. They're retrodictions. They failed their prediction. Then they had to do a U-turn. They waited for the evidence, of course, and then they made a retrodiction based on the new evidence. It's failure after failure after failure. Remember when they said you can't just take two animals, put them somewhere, and then have them reproduce and grow? Inbreeding's going to kill them. That Noah's Ark story is ridiculous. What did we find? The founder effect is completely true, and we see it example after example. Genetic similarity, their best and favorite argument. That was a creationist prediction. Evolution predicted the exact opposite. You can just go down the list. It's so ridiculous when they make those absurd postulations, you know.
Have you noticed, Matt, and I see this in the comment sections of our videos, especially the last several videos we've done, that you've done a phenomenal job editing and utilizing AI for a lot of these cool novel images. And so we've put out videos on the scientific evidence for Adam and Eve, just offering the viewer the best and most up-to-date pieces of scientific evidence for biblical creation, for Adam and Eve, the biblical Adam and Eve. And we've also put out a video demolishing their favorite argument for common descent, endogenous retroviruses. We've demonstrated sufficiently that the majority of ERVs are not the ancient remnants of past viral infections, but represent what? Created units of DNA function. Anyways, in the comment section, have you noticed with the full-time proud evolutionist trolls, those that believe they're related to banana plants and strawberries and that science, have you noticed that they're not up to date at all on the science, nor have they proven themselves worthy, because clearly they haven't read any of our material on young earth creation and our best arguments, the testable predictions that you've talked about. Have you noticed that, Matt?
Yeah, they live in their own world. They don't want to change. They've made up their mind. They like it. They either make money from it. They like the popularity they get from it. They spent all their money and time and education, and nobody wants to believe that they were lied to. Nobody wants to take credit and think that I wasted my time believing that nonsense. No way. I'm never going to believe that. I used to see this all the time in martial arts. People would walk through that door into a Brazilian jiu-jitsu class, and they had 20 years of karate. They'd come in with their 7th degree black belt, and we would send them to the kids, and the kids would kill them. And they could just, the look on their face of like, I was lied to. I learned garbage for 20 years and it's down the drain. And their mind can't process that. They don't want to accept it. They just keep like, I'll do it again. Let's try again. Let's try again. And they leave and their minds are just destroyed. It's just the same thing when you talk to these critics. They've already made up their mind. To them, they'll never really convert or be open to it because they really want it to be true. Aaron Raw is a Satanist, so he's never going to convert. His crony group and the people that follow him and like that kind of content, they've made up their minds. They've slapped that label on themselves. By the time you've labeled yourself as something like that, the odds of being able to change that label are nearly impossible. It's not going to be you and me that does it. It's going to be the spirit that comes onto them and be like, oh man, there's like, what have I been doing with my life? Why do I choose to hang out with a crowd that's literally the most disliked minority on earth? That's notorious for suicide and depression and medication intake and school shootings and just go down the list. Like, why in the world would you ever want to be associated with a group of those people? You have to have a mental problem, or you just have to be like, nah, I choose to associate with what I have to, because this is my crowd, this is my group of people, and that's kind of what they do. And I don't understand it, but I guess me and you will never understand it because we can never relate, because me and you converted, we changed our mind, our opinions, right? So it's like once you get a taste of it, and you look at the evidence, and you're open, and you're thinking about it, and you go, okay, well, I never considered there's an alternative view. Let me look into it. And then you do, and you realize how much more sense it makes. It doesn't matter like who your friends are. They can make fun of you. They can ask you questions. They can do anything. But what's going to come down to is, are you rooted in it? Are you going to be able to explain it? Does it make sense to you? Because a lot of people just go, yeah, I believe it on faith, and that's good enough. And the problem with that is, what happens when you have kids and those kids go to school and they learn that they came from a monkey or a primate? What are you going to tell them? You said, well, no, we came from Adam and Eve. They said, prove it. School's showing me the evidence. You're not. And then the parent is left with, I guess I don't know. That's not good for a Christian, because we have to be able to give a reason for the faith that we have and the reason behind it. And if you don't have any evidence, then you're not going to help other people. That's where you and me come in. We created Standing for Truth because we wanted to give answers to Christians and be able to help them. And that's what we do.
We seek to answer all objections, engage all challenges. We don't want to ignore the critics or pretend they don't exist. No, we want to see what the best the critics have to offer is. And you nailed it, Matt. The Bible says, and be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh you a reason of the hope that is in you. And so that's what we do. And these critics are clearly ill-equipped to deal with our very best arguments. And that includes our best counters or objections to their favorite lines of evidence, like endogenous retroviruses, for example, as we're going to see in a video that we'll respond to briefly, from evolutionists like Godless Engineer Forrest Valkai. You saw their so-called response on ERVs to the program we did with Eric Hovind on Creation Today. Atheist Bill called in, and he found our program to be very helpful. And when the evolutionary community loses their best so-called evidence for why they're related to chimpanzees, banana plants, and puppy dogs, that's not a good thing. Because, Matt, if their best so-called evidence is demolished and easily overturned, what does that say about all their other lines of evidence that they can? If their best is just so easily dismantled, what about all the rest, brother?
All they can do is posture. That's why their best evidence has shifted into taxonomy and cladistics and groupings. It's like, this isn't evidence of anything. These are classification systems. You guys have to run from actual evidence and then go into the mythological created charts. It's like if me and you devised up a system, and then all of a sudden people are like, that's absolutely the best system to prove evolution that there is. It's like, well, we just made it up. It's just a category. It doesn't prove anything. We're using it to classify things. so that we can help and explain things better. That's all it's supposed to be. And so, like you said, they have now removed some of their best pieces of evidence and shifted them because we took them, and they are the best for biblical creation, like Adam and Eve. They love to say that those weren't real people, and now guess what? We can prove that they were real, and they hate it. They hate it.
They hate it. And their best challenges and arguments to that data we've addressed, one of them being the Neanderthal DNA challenge, which, to set the foundation, we are going to discuss here. But before we do that, we'll address the first couple questions that have come in. And Matt, you made a good point earlier that when you're enlightened, the Bible talks about, the light bulb goes on, you understand the truth, you see the world for what it is, and you are converted. You are turned from the lies and turned to the truth. And Doki Doki Bible Club has a great question. How come you guys haven't converted back to being evolutionists yet? And it's such a good question, Brother Doki. And we like to define terms, right? Because you'll oftentimes meet people, especially in the secular world, when you're outside of YouTube, outside of online, Matt, if you're confronted with a skeptic, because here's the thing, you made some points earlier that reminded me of a good question that you can ask skeptics and critics in discussion is, okay, before I engage your objection, before I interact with your challenges, here's a question I have for you. Okay, to the skeptic. If Christianity were true, would you be a Christian? Would you convert? And not surprisingly, now that we've dealt with so many of these critics, there's a lot of militant atheists and skeptics of Christianity, critics of Christianity that would say no. I mean, people like Aaron Ra, who you've pointed out is a proclaiming Satanist. He's even said no, because it's not an evidence issue with a lot of these guys. It's a heart issue. The evidence is there. They hate the Bible. They hate God. They hate Christianity. And so even if God came down and said, I'm real, the Bible's true, you can trust my word, they still wouldn't be a Christian. Then you know what you're dealing with. But if the person asks, yeah, I'm just skeptical and I've got questions and I'm looking for answers, because we've all had that, right, at one point. And so if they're open-minded, then it's a good opportunity to move forward. And when it comes to a question like this, evolution, Matt, what do we mean by evolution? Do we deny change over time? Or is it that kind of evolution that says all life, including plants and animals, are related through common ancestry? Because you'll see in the real world, right, when we're not online, some people might say, oh, what, you don't believe in evolution? Because what have they been taught evolution is? Changes in allele frequencies and populations over time, change over time. I mean, things change over time. Our cell phones change over time. Our thinking processes change over time. So that's not what we are against. We are pro-change, but it's that large scale forward evolution, the theory of common descent. Isn't that right, Matt?
Right. It's the charts that we see in the evolutionary textbooks that show a linear progression from bacteria, small-like ancestors, to the entire tree of life. That's what we reject. And we also reject the concept that the new novel types of morphological and phenotypical change that they say happens from beneficial mutations over time is what we just do not see. Right. They said we need hyperevolution. No, we don't. Because evolution requires these beneficial mutations to change these highly conserved regions like the Hox gene, which would be needed to make new anatomical features appear on something like a bacteria or a sponge, because we're related to sponges, remember? Well, we still have the sponges. Where are those intermediaries from that sponge up that evolutionary tree of life? They'll just like to show you the other stages, nothing in the in-between. So that's where their myth comes in. That's where their fable starts.
Right. We're not talking about just regular change over time. Okay. We believe in change over time. If by evolution you mean domestic dogs and wolves are related through common ancestry, then yeah, we're not going to have a problem. But if you mean by evolution domestic dogs, wolves, and banana plants are related through common ancestry, and that fish evolved into fishermen and bacteria-like organisms evolved into biologists, then that's where we have the issue. That's not science. And the evolutionary community, they have to explain these major evolutionary transitions. They have to explain in an empirical manner the necessary increase in phenotypic complexity, the transition from single-celled organisms to complex multi-celled organisms like whales and elephants and people. Okay, they need to explain the evolution of complex organs, the development of complex nervous systems, circulatory systems. These are the types of changes that they really struggle with. Because, Matt, how could you not believe in evolution? Don't you know, brother, that there are some adult human beings out there, they can digest milk? How do you not believe that you're related to a strawberry and a pine tree? I mean, have you not seen? I'm the evolutionary salesman, okay? I'm the Jehovah's Witness evolutionist salesman knocking on your door.
Yeah.
Have you heard, Matt, about the beneficial mutation where adults can digest milk?
Ooh,
Common descent's true.
Oh man, you mean the fact that all humans can digest milk until the gene is epigenetically turned off now stays on in some people? Wow. Imagine that. I must be related to the milk that I'm drinking in the refrigerator then.
Right, the cow.
Yeah.
The cow that you got the milk from.
Yeah.
And so this is going to result, I think, in several memes. The evolutionist salesman. Have you not heard that there's bacteria out there that can digest nylon? That means you're related to a bacteria. Like, this is how weak their arguments are. And so to answer Doki's excellent question, when you're enlightened and you see the truth, even when it comes to these changes we see genetically and biologically are horizontal. What evolution requires are vertical changes, right? Because they believe in what? Single to multi-celled evolution. They believe that fish evolved into amphibians, evolved into reptiles, mammals, monkeys, and man. That's large-scale evolution. But what we see in the biological world are either what? Mutations that are deleterious. We find changes that are based on the pre-programmed ability to change, pre-programmed adaptation, epigenetic changes, which you just mentioned. And so when you're enlightened, we don't become evolutionists for a few reasons. Clearly, the Bible teaches separate ancestry and special creation, right? God created two people, Adam and Eve. Adam from the dust of the ground, Eve from his rib. Jesus talks about from the beginning of creation, he made them male and female, clearly pointing back to creation week and the creation of Adam and Eve. Adam's the first man, the Bible says. Eve, the mother of all living. Clearly, evolution is not in the scriptures. And then when you look at the scientific data, you see that evolution actually conflicts and contradicts with the Bible. But the scientific data does not support evolutionary theory. So why would we ruin a perfectly good book with a dead theory? It's not even a theory. It's an imaginary fairy tale. And so in a nutshell, the reason why we haven't converted back is because the evidence is weak. When you've been enlightened and you see their best so-called arguments like, ooh, some humans can digest milk, or there's some bacteria out there that can digest nylon, or homology, nested hierarchies, ERVs, pseudogenes. We've dealt with all of these. Their very best arguments are actually on the side of the biblical creationists. And so again, when you're converted, you see the truth. Matt, you can't unsee the truth. I used to believe in Santa Claus, brother. And then my parents told me that Santa Claus isn't real. They are basically Santa Claus. And I was sad. I was disappointed. I have now been given the truth rather than the lie of Santa Claus. And I'm not going to one day go back to believing in Santa Claus. The evidence isn't there. I'm not going to one day go back into believing that whales, pine trees, human beings, and banana plants are related through common ancestry, because the evidence isn't there, brother. How would you answer this question?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to the type of mindset that you have, I would have to say, because there might be people out there that would be like, well, I mean, I want to be a young earth creationist, but there's just too much evidence that the earth is old and that the universe is old, and I'm an old earth creationist. I say go right ahead, because young earth creation is actually so much study and work, and people are going to ask you why you believe it. And if you say I don't know, well, the critic is going to come at you, they're going to attack you, and they're going to hate you for it. And if you just say, oh well, the days could have been any age, just go with that and then keep learning, and then you'll realize, wait, God had to make things in their entirety. You can't just have an earth like half made. You can't just have like Adam walking around in diapers in an infant body. What's he going to eat? There's no fruit on the trees. So things had to have been made in their entirety. So there's already some age there, but is it really the age of millions of years that evolution is proposing? Of course not. So a lot of people say, well, Genesis can't be taken literally. Well, then why are we getting predictions correct? Why is any of it actually working? There shouldn't be any evidence for young earth creation at all, because you couldn't get a more opposite theory than evolution. I mean, they say it's old, we say it's young. It's like polar opposite. And we don't just say it's like young by a couple million years. It's like young by a few thousand. That's like as young as you can get in the grand scheme of a universe that's billions and billions of years old. So there shouldn't be any evidence for us, but there's evidence everywhere. So it's a tricky question. Some people don't like science, so they're not going to like young earth creation, because young earth creation is science. So me and you like to evangelize through science.
And it requires so much in-depth study of science.
Right. And some theology too, because right, we have to go, well, what about the days of creation? What did they mean in Hebrew? Could they have been longer periods of time? And some people say, yeah, they each day was 1,000 years. Well, guess what? You're still a young earth creationist. It's 1,000 years. It's not old. It's like, man, these people are crazy. It's like they're trying to force the billions of years into like day 1 and 2, you know? They're really trying to take that secular idea and move it in so they can be happy with whatever their friends and neighbors think. They're really trying to meld that secular idea with the scripture. It's like, why? These atheists don't care. You think that they care? Okay, tell Erica and Dan and R and Raw that we're fine. Actually, we've changed our mind. We're theistic evolutionists. You should join us now. We've converted. They're not going to convert. They hate us. They spend most of their time making videos against us.
Yeah, and they recognize that theistic evolutionism is largely a compromise. They see that as a win for them. How many times do you see in debates? And that's why when you see these theistic evolutionist Christian apologists debate atheists in campuses or in live debates, they lose big points when they just concede and are unwilling to engage the science of common descent, because the evolutionists, the second that those Christian apologists just say, yeah, sure, the universe is billions of years old, common descent is true, you know, Adam and Eve may have come from a greater population, Adam was just the first priest, or whatever compromise position they want to hold to, the evolutionists that they're battling love it. It's a free win to them, right? Because they want you to agree with those positions, because they know that, okay, so as a theistic evolutionist, where do you stick God? Basically at the origin of life and the origin of the universe. And then from there, it's just all naturalistic. And so, yeah, like you said, deep down inside, the atheists are not really respecting the theistic evolutionist position. They do recognize that it is a deep compromise. And Matt, you and I, we've been in talks, and we're going to be engaging in some 2 versus 2 debates on modern day debate with the best the evolutionist camp has to offer. So you guys in the audience, get ready to watch the evolutionary community get wrecked, brother. Apologetics 101 says Matt is getting all excited, and rightfully so, Matt, because we don't like Bible compromise. We don't like bad science. And these critics, they're doing a really bad job at defending their arguments, aren't they, brother?
Oh man, even some of our own side, it's like, you guys, you need to study more. The evidence is so easy that it's on our side so much. There's no reason you have to concede anything anymore. It's everywhere. It's like genetics is really what destroys it. And that's what evolution
Yeah.
actually is. They love to run to the fossil record. They love to run out to radiometric dating. They'll do anything except for talk about the genetics, because that's really where their theory dies. And that's ironic, because that's where evolution lives.
Yeah, well, we love to focus on genetics. It's genes, traits, and genetics that are inherited, sperm and egg. And we've literally discovered our first parents, Adam and Eve, in genetics. Evolution has largely been overturned because of the genetic data. And okay, so the next question here, this is a good one. Matt, Apologetics 101 says, Erica had presented a response to the Proton 21 experiments on her YEC is physically impossible video. I'll say this before you respond. Matt and I, we did a 4-hour heat problem video, and we were responding to Erica's video. And I can't quite remember what it was called, but it was something like, is the heat problem the death knell or the fatal blow to young earth creation? Something like that. So you and I, we responded to most of that word for word. We did it live. Erica was in the live chat. A lot of your other militant critics were in the live chat. I put up, you were in the hot seat, Matt. You did a fantastic job, brother. I put up all of their objections, their challenges, and you refuted them all. And so the critics, those guardians of common descent on YouTube, they can say that, oh, the heat problem, is this unsolvable problem or whatever they want to assert. But the truth is, we've so far had the last word on that. And so that was our video, 3.5 to 4 hours. We responded to Gutsy Gibbon. Matt, you did a great job defending your position on the so-called heat problem. And so if you remember that video is out. But anyways, Matt, so he's wondering, I wanted to know if you've got a response to Erica. So from what I know, we did basically respond to her in that live show we did. But Matt, anything else you want to add to that?
Sure. Because I don't know exactly what that argument is, I'm going to throw out a couple assumptions of what it could be. One, remember, she's already conceded that if the Proton 21 laboratories results are true, that there is no heat problem. But then there's another problem that comes from it. And that is the radiometric elements in the geologic column. She goes, that becomes an issue now. But she actually conceded that there would be no heat problem if the Proton 21 laboratories or experiment is true. Now, they want to deny that they're not true, which is, I find hilarious and ironic, because these are the very people that say we want laboratory experiments to prove these things, and then we'll believe it. Well, guess what? It's exactly what we got from the Proton 21 laboratories. The laboratory results that made radioactive elements in the same proportion and ratio that we have on Earth today. What better could you possibly want? Then they tried to say, well, it probably wasn't true because cold fusion isn't true. Well, there's 3 forms of cold fusion. They did one of them, and they did it so often that they sold the elements that they created. But it doesn't end there. Okay, I'm going to share my screen real quick, and I will go to my window, and you will see right here another laboratory that actually did do another experiment. These are the names of the scientists over here on the left. They used another form of energy to create radioactive elements. This is probably a generated image of what it would look like, but these are the actual images. And what you're looking at is the background radiation, including the elements that formed. And you can see the bolder looking circle is the element that they can identify clearly being made in that laboratory. So here's another, directly from their website. These are the elements that formed. They did the exact same thing that the Proton 21 laboratories did. And this one's in the United States. And you can see they can make potassium, iron. They've made a lot of the elements, and right here is their chart of the ones that they created. And what I liked is that one of them, or 2 of them down here, are radioactive. So they made radioactive elements that are the decay process that would normally take tens of thousands to millions of years, and they were produced directly in the laboratory. So we have a backup from the Proton 21 laboratories doing the exact same thing that they were doing. So to say it's impossible when it's being done in 2 different locations, okay, they can complain all they want. I've now validated it twice from independent laboratories using different technology to get the same results, and literally the same ratios are forming. So it's game over, because remember, they needed ratios to be made in primitive Earth environments, because if they're going to say that supernovas created the elements billions of years ago, then they would have been created in the ratios that they would have been billions of years ago, but they're not. They're created as they are today. So it's really case closed in my mind. They can complain, but it doesn't really matter. They were taking advantage of the Proton 21 laboratories because it was in Ukraine and it's now closed. So they can just say, oh, they were making it up, or oh, they were lying, because the scientists aren't around to defend themselves. They're finished.
But the papers are legit. The papers exist. The experiments exist.
Right.
And when I listen to them, I'll second what you're saying. Matt, you made me go rapture.
Sorry. I removed you instead of my screen. Sorry, I pushed you to the back.
You're doing good. So it's a lot of complaints, and this is good, Brian. If you have specifics. So he says Erica claimed that these experiments, Proton 21, required the plasma conditions of a star in that video. What are your thoughts on that, Matt?
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. We place these creative elements on day one of creation. It is Answers in Genesis that prefers the catastrophic plate tectonics that would have these being accelerated during the flood that would cause massive catastrophic problems with that. And then there's also Walt Brown's theory, hydroplate theory, that would also have these elements being formed during the flood, which again would be true. It would turn the Earth into a ball of plasma, and it would melt the core of the Earth and then everything on the surface. That's the problem with these models, is they're invoking something that they didn't need to or don't need to, because of the mere fact that it is true that the machines that created these proton, this fusion inside of it were cold, and therefore cold repacking was occurring, but that's a localized, contained area. Now, if that were to happen on Earth, it's not contained. So therefore, that energy, it has to go somewhere, and it would just disperse and cause massive amounts of heat to go. It has to go somewhere, and if it were to go into the oceans, it would melt the ocean. So that is why there's a heat problem with those models, but we don't need to invoke it. There doesn't have to be. And a matter of fact, accelerating the nuclear decay from the catastrophic plate tectonic model is also another big problem. If you want to invoke that during the flood, because the moon and meteors and comets that hit Earth that are radiometrically dated date the same age as the Earth. So what did they accelerate their nuclear decay at the same time Earth did for some reason? It just doesn't fit, guys. It doesn't fit. This fits. This evidence is perfect. The reason it's perfect is because this is what we see in a laboratory. You guys have your evidence, and it's in print form. You can't ask for better. 2 separate laboratories, 2 published studies.
This goes back to what we said earlier. It's not always an evidence issue. It's a hard issue, because you're giving them exactly what they're asking for. You're meeting their challenge, and the critics can disagree. They can complain all they want, but this is what I recommend people do. You can type in Gutsy Gibbon heat problem standing for truth. Now, I do appreciate Gutsy Gibbon's willingness to engage and interact with us and the ongoing creation versus evolution debate in general in a high level way. And so she does give us videos and points to look at, to engage. And as a result, it strengthens our understanding, strengthens our positions, allows us to make more predictions. She's debating Dr. Jerry Bergman coming up here soon on human evolution. And so I do appreciate anybody who's willing to actually debate and to get into the debate coliseum with those that they disagree with. But this is what I'd recommend people do. You can go in the search bar, Gutsy Gibbon heat problem standing for truth, and you'll see that the last word on this issue has been us. So Matt, this is the video we did. Again, it's a comprehensive one. Is Gutsy Gibbon right?
I even have a book on it.
Yeah, right behind me. So I've actually got your book on radioactive decay behind me. So they're free. And you had a fantastic debate with Grayson on the topic, and that went for 3 hours. Right. So we've discussed and engaged this topic. We've beat this horse to death, basically. And so the critics are free. They can check out this video or go through the book and do a point by point rebuttal. But as far as what I've seen, and as far as I'm concerned, they have not addressed those final points that we've made.
And what's amazing is that debate with Grayson was way before I even found this new laboratory in the United States that was making these elements, because he denied that it was even a real thing and never even existed as well. These people really, they ask for evidence, but they don't want it.
Right.
Somebody said, what's the name of that process? What was that? Sydney, what's the name of that process? It's called adiabatic. I hope I pronounced it right. Adiabatic.
That's right.
It's related to the process or condition which the heat does not enter or leave a system that's contained. So what Walt Brown tried to say is that maybe when the continental crust that was being held up by the pillars of the earth, the granite pillars, the continent broke, those pillars crushed, the continent of the United States fell down, and when it pressed and it shot all the water out, that jetted out the side and created supercritical water. And during that compression event, the water was passing through the granite rock that has crystals in it. And those crystals caused what is known as a piezoelectric effect, causing voltage and the electricity to form. And it was trapped under there from that massive pressure. Water was shooting up. And as it was creating a supercritical water, it was forming those radioactive elements in that area. And that was trapping that area, creating that adiabatic concentration so the heat couldn't escape. That's how Walt Brown got around the heat that would have been dispersed into the atmosphere and other areas. So he tried to get around it with that. It could possibly work, but he didn't live at a time when you could run a simulation like that. I would love to see one done now because we have AI. He could literally run that scenario to see if that's true or not. We can do that.
In your debate with Grayson on the topic of dating methods, you guys got into the heat problem and engaged the model that you proposed and wrote a book on. What were one or two of his best so-called arguments, and what is the most effective way at debunking those, brother?
Wait, what was the question? The first part?
In your debate with Grayson.
Oh, yeah.
On radiometric dating.
Okay.
He's another one of those critics that seems to hand wave away the Proton 21.
Yeah. He said it probably wasn't real. It never existed. Well,
isn't that a conspiracy that they're invoking, though? They like to throw conspiracy at us. Like, oh, you creationists, you guys, you're just arguing from a conspiracy theory. But
yeah,
them just denying it, or this is probably not real, or it didn't happen the way that the papers describe. Isn't that just invoking a conspiracy in many ways?
It is, because a lot of the things in young Earth creation, we fall into the same boat as the evolutionists. When we're talking about Neanderthal, well, guess what? They're not alive. So we have to also use assumptions about the past. Like, what could have caused their mutation rate to be accelerated? They might explain it one way, we might explain it another, but we can't test it. This we can test, and they say it's not true, but it's exactly the evidence that they wanted. Remember, he said, give me evidence and I'll believe it. Well, I hunted it down. I literally looked and found the Proton 21 laboratories, and I go, I can't believe it. This is what they wanted. Then we literally have evidence now. So I gathered it up and showed him in the debate, and he just said, I don't know. I've never heard of it before. And then afterwards, as soon as the debate was over, he went on another channel and said it was all lies, all made up. And it's not true at all. In the debate, though, he didn't say any of this. So they like to just hand wave away things. It's very peculiar, very strange. It's a weird mindset that they want evidence but don't want to look at it. And I mean, they sold their results. They were selling them to laboratories that were making medical equipment with these radiometric half-life elements. And one of the questions that I wish I had a better answer toward back then would have been the ratio of how fast their half-lives were. For example, he said, how come when we look at a zircon crystal, there's lots of lead in there? And the lead can only come from the decay process. So therefore, it must have been slow. And I was like, no, it was actually fast because the entire chain was made all at the same time. Now I know the ratios of that chain, and it was forming lead within minutes, days, hours, seconds, weeks, and months. It didn't take millions of years. And now that I know the ratio, it's much easier. But I was caught off guard in the debate on that one. I didn't know the exact numbers, and I like to know things. I like to have answers. So,
well, that's why debates are good too. That's one of the upsides or positive aspects of debates, is that in many ways it's peer review, or critic review, since those we debate are usually critics, but it gives us ideas to further investigate. It helps advance our many research projects. So Matt, great answer. Maze Page, has the chimpanzee Y chromosome been traced back to a grandpappy chimp yet? Yeah, I mean, that's one argument that we love to focus on. I wrote an article, I'll see if I can pull it up here, responding to Dr. Stefan Frello, who of course will never tap out, because again, it's not necessarily an evidence issue, but you give these guys answers and you destroy their challenges. And then at that point, you leave it up to them to hopefully either tap out or just show the audience that these critics, even if they don't tap out, it's not that they have a good rebuttal to what they're saying. And so when you consider overall gene content, architecture, and size differences, your chimpanzee Y chromosome, and I've done whole videos on this, so this will just be a quick answer, and the human Y is less than 30% the same now. Less than 30%. Those are massive differences. When you bring in the gorilla Y, the human and gorilla Y are actually more similar to each other than the chimpanzee is to the gorilla. There's an inconsistency in their so-called nested hierarchy. And the answers that they've provided, it's a lot of evolutionary philosophy. It's a lot of just so imaginary stories with sperm competition, faster substitution rates. They have no real good empirical answer to why the Y chromosome is so dissimilar if human evolution and common descent is true. Here's the article I wrote debunking Stefan Frello. So for those that want a comprehensive technical rebuttal to what the critics could say on this, I would recommend people go have a look at this article. I've got good visuals for everybody as well. Here's the visual from a prominent paper on the issue. Here's the human Y, chimpanzee, gorilla Y. You can see, I mean, the human Y and the chimpanzee Y. The chimpanzee Y is lacking the entirety of the heterochromatic arm. It's half the size. You're starting at 50% there. And in this article, I engage their main objections. Here's the newest data showing that it's less than 30% the same now. And so, guys, it's a great time to be a biblical Christian. And so, no, the Y chromosome, every single male Y chromosome are nearly identical. Okay, they can be traced back to a single male Y chromosomal ancestor, and that human Y chromosomal ancestor is nothing like the chimpanzee, because the chimpanzee Y is nothing like the human Y. And so, okay, let's do one more question so far of those that have come in. And then Matt, I want us to engage Neanderthals, because we've got some good stuff on that. And I know you're packing some solid images, so this is going to be good. Doki Doki, great question. Is having a call-in show a good enough reason to duck formal debates, or am I missing the forest for the trees? No pun intended, Forrest Valkai. I find open mic debates to be very beneficial. When we host open mic debates, we allow people in. We don't kick them. We don't cut them off. We give them plenty of time. We go for 5-6 hours. We allow them to share screen. We can see their face. They can see our face. But these call-in shows, like The Line, there's a lot of muting. Well, for one, you can't go in and share a screen and show the technical papers and back up the arguments. They will rarely allow you to hold their feet to the fire. If they're getting demolished, they'll either just kick you or make some kind of excuse. So, yeah, I think them saying, oh, well, call into our call-in show where they have complete control and you're so limited in the way that you can argue, I don't think it's effective. I think formal debate, informal debate, open mic discussions, long form open mic discussions, those are very effective. And so I see other questions that came in, but we'll save those for a little bit later, because we do have some points now that we want to cover. Matt, I am going to lay out this point, my brother, and then we're going to get your thoughts. So this from good old Stefan Frello, Dr. Stefan Frello. I've got his argument saved here in a document as I've been responding to him. And so on the Neanderthal question, why do Neanderthals have genetic markers that modern Homo sapiens don't? And why do modern Homo sapiens have genetic markers that Neanderthals don't. And why do Neanderthals have more mutations than modern humans? They must be older, right? Their challenge is basically you can't explain the DNA differences that exist in Neanderthals in just 4,500 years since the flood. There's too many DNA differences. Neanderthals must be older, 100, 200 to 300,000 years, rather than 4,500 to 6,000. And so I've done a lot of work on Neanderthals. I've done a lot of formal debates. We've done entire videos on Neanderthals. We also just put out a short clip on Neanderthals showing that, no, all you need is more mutations in a short amount of time, okay, which we can easily explain for many reasons. Neanderthals could have been hypermutating at first, then they became highly inbred, right? As they became isolated and they existed in small tribes. Okay, we know they were 40% less fit than modern humans. We know that there are runs of homozygosity. They got these massive stretches of identical letters, highly inbred. But because they exist in a small isolated population, and in light of mutations accumulating and the degeneration that's taking place, you're going to have faster rates of fixation. And so every time these novel mutations, deleterious mutations, are stuck in place or fixed, that leads to what? More genetic distinctiveness. Okay. They also existed closer to the flood. And so they're going to start off a lot different. They could have had errors in DNA repair enzymes that would result in more mutations accumulating. But the big hypothesis that we put forward is that they would have been subject to radiation rocks and also many of the Neanderthals that lived in caves. Okay. And so the flood would have comprised a lot of heat, energy, radiation, and where Neanderthals existed immediately post-flood, they would have been subject to radiation rocks as well as radiation and various chemicals in caves, and that would also speed up mutation rates. I've got a paper that shows how modern families, there's examples of a mutation rate that's 7 times faster than normal. Okay, this is all backed up by the conventional literature and known data, known facts. Here's AI overviews, but you can check all the associated articles and papers. Yes, radiation rocks can increase mutation rates. This is because the natural radioactivity of some rocks can emit ionizing radiation, which damages DNA, leading to mutations. Okay. And so these hominins like Neanderthals, which are all fully human, made in the image of God, a very sophisticated people group that goes for who? Erectus, Neanderthals, Heidelbergensis, Floresiensis, Naledi. Okay, so what we know about Denisovans, Neanderthals, Heidelbergensis, they would have been subject to radiation rocks. That radiation and also the factors associated with the cave environments would have sped up the mutation rates, even 10 times, explaining their DNA differences. Notice this. Yes, chemicals in caves can potentially influence mutation rates in animals. Okay, so yes, the possibility is there that cave environments can speed up mutation rates. Does radiation speed up mutation rates? Yes, radiation can increase mutation rates. And once these DNA repair enzymes become damaged, that means you have less of these DNA repair enzymes to fix the mutations that are taking place. A single cell in a single day can experience up to 1 million DNA breaks. I'm not saying every single cell, but it's a single cell could. And we have roughly 60 trillion cells. So if you have all of these DNA repair enzymes being destroyed in Neanderthal tribes, then more mutations by definition are going to be passed on. So we have a very good evidence-based explanation. So Matt, this is where I want you to take off, brother, with some visuals and some points. So Stefan Frello says, again, this is just a hand wave. This is like the Proton 21 argument, Matt. We give them an answer. We give them a sufficient answer to their challenge. They're not expecting an answer, right, Matt? So they're caught off guard. And what they end up doing is just hand waving it away rather than tapping out. Because an open-minded person would say, yeah, okay, that makes sense. That's right. A good answer. That's evidence-based. It's backed by the data. So Stefan Fellow here says, if you keep insisting high mutation rate due to living in caves, not just caves is one factor, but just geographically where they exist across Eurasia, okay, the rocks that they're associated with, that they're living near or on, would have more radiation. You have to document that modern humans that lived simultaneously with Neanderthals had a significantly lower tendency to live in caves. Here's the thing. These groups, these subgroups like Neanderthals, right? They broke off from the main population. That's the point. They became isolated in less than ideal environments and existed in less than ideal conditions. Okay? Those are different and unique than the conditions and the environments that the group or lineage modern humans came from. Okay? Because at the Tower of Babel, you have people groups spread out, but you have other groups like Neanderthals, okay, Floresiensis, Naledi, like the islanders too, like Floresiensis Hobbit got stuck and isolated on an island, and they experienced island dwarfism. So that's not a very good argument. And he says, if you think they had a higher mutation rate for other reasons, you better come up with something more convincing than a paper talking about a few out of thousands of families with high mutation rates. What a weak argument and rescue device. And so I've been trying to find these papers, and I will, Matt, as you're talking, but we have these papers relatively recently where they document, okay, families exposed to radiation, errors in DNA repair enzymes, where they are experiencing 7 times the number of mutations, a mutation rate that's 7-fold higher.
That's funny, because when we go to the Amish, they're 7 to 14 times slower. So wow, that's pretty cool. We have 7 times slower and 7 times faster.
Well, and that's the point. These are unique situations. So yeah, we're showing you an example of radiation, of certain environmental factors that can speed up the mutation rate, which correlates nicely with Neanderthals because they also were a unique people group. That's the whole point that Stefan Frello is missing.
I mean, what does Stefan Frello think? I mean, you can't go to certain caves today where people give explorations. You know, you get a guided cave tour. You can't spend a lot of time in caves even today. Why? Because they're dangerous. You can't. So imagine sleeping in one and living in one. It's going to be extremely harmful. And we know today that caves are dangerous because of this. Right. That's today. So of course we know that it's true. You don't have to go to the scientific journals. Just go inside of a cave explorations and travel around and do caving. You'll learn real quick. You can't spend a lot of time in caves. It's obvious.
We know based on the scientific literature that it's possible for the mutation rate to be sped up, and sped up significantly. So Matt, what I want you to address, brother, is this argument about evidence, because he's basically denying that we have the evidence. And so I know you have some good pictures and arguments that further strengthens this hypothesis that Neanderthals, which were fully human, but they did have more mutations. How do we explain the fact that they had more mutations? Again, for the many reasons that we just described. But Matt, show us some examples and answer Stefan Frello's objection here.
All right.
The evidence supporting the radiation rock hypothesis, brother. Go ahead.
No problem. However, before we do it, should we check for questions before we move on?
Yeah, well, yeah. Here's what's perfect. Sydney Raptor. It's not an explanation. It's a speculation. No, this is an explanation that's backed by the evidence. Okay. Firstly, we know radiation rocks, as we've demonstrated here, can speed up mutation rates. Errors in DNA repair enzymes can speed up mutation rates. Chemicals in caves can speed up mutation rates. We have real-time data from the secular literature, the conventional literature, showing families that exist today that are hypermutating. So it exists. It's a thing. And so this Neanderthal challenge is not a precluding challenge. Okay. But you want more evidence for that, Matt.
Okay.
Let's hand it to you.
Here we go. We're going to look at all of the things that are verifiable, things that we know can change mutation rates and can alter things, and what brought an extinction to the mammoth itself from genetic meltdown, the same thing that killed Neanderthal. So we're going to go over that, and I'm going to show you a list that I formulated that we are going to go over right now. The first one is Vulcanism. If you guys know anything about the biblical creation model, it's that at the end of the flood, there was massive subduction going on around the perimeter of the newly formed continents. This formed what is known as the Ring of Fire. And what this did is created a massive ash cloud that covered certain regions of the earth and started the Ice Age. So we have the Ice Age coming down, and we have this haze smoke going around and overlapping some of the areas that just so happened to be where Neanderthal moved to and lived. And these are very detrimental because humans mostly congregated in the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East. And this is where the Tower of Babel was. However, some people branched off and decided to migrate early. And these early migration patterns either trapped people in Africa because of the Ice Age melt-off, or what it also did is it trapped Neanderthal up into the north because of their small population size. So again, we'll go back to the list. And after Vulcanism, we are going to, and why, number one, would Vulcanism actually do that? Would simply be because there's a lot of iridium in the atmosphere under these ash clouds that you don't want to breathe in. That would be one of the first reasons. Also, the change now in atmosphere. But living under harsh conditions would bring nutrient scarcity and deprivation, and extreme climate change would mean the Ice Age is coming on. So this could cause more replication errors during cellular division. And we know that Neanderthals especially lived in colder, harsher regions of the world. And these are pictures directly from the internet based on what people perceived and thought Neanderthal looked like and how they lived. And there they are outside after probably killing and eating a mammoth, which means that more viral load would come from forced extreme diet change. This is directly consistent with them eating mammoth, reindeer, cave bear, and the auroch, which is a type of cattle back then. And why do they eat those things? Because they're living in an area in an Ice Age where you're not going to do any type of farming, and there's going to be only one type of a food source. So they've got raw meat and flesh as their main component of their diet, which again, now you're risking pathogens, you're risking whatever viral load that animal could have had on it, which would also have sped up the mutation rate. Then, of course, the Ice Age itself, which had came down all the way close to Spain and the entire region that we know that Neanderthal lived in. And they not only had that volcanism and the ash cloud on a lot of it, they also had the Ice Age that was coming down into these regions where they lived. And that would cause what? Lack of vitamin C, lack of the B vitamins because of their diet strictly being meat-based. They would have had low vitamin D. And we know that some of the first Neanderthals that were found were just regular people that had rickets. They actually weren't Neanderthal at all. Or they were Neanderthal, but they had rickets. Why'd they have rickets? Lack of sunlight. They were living in a very harsh climate. That also means that it mimics the damage that radiation does. So they had hyper mutation rates simply because of those factors. Then on top of it, they lived in small populations. Again, not young earth creationist graphics or ideas at all. These are evolutionary paleontologists that admit they lived in smaller population size. What does that mean? That natural or purifying selection is weaker, and they're more governed by genetic drift, which would have spread the mutations faster. So therefore, natural selection isn't there to purge those mutations because their population isn't growing and natural selection isn't working good to remove those mutations. So that's another way that it would have been bad. Small populations are not good. Then they start what? They don't have cousins or deep-rooted cousins that they're marrying. They're marrying within the families, killing their population slowly. Then what do? Their diet is mostly meat-based, right? What does fire smoke do? And cooking this meat at high temperatures do? Well, it glycates your food. High glycated meals are damaging and age the body as well. Matter of fact, that's where the acronym AGE comes from, AGE, Advanced Glycotic End Products. They age the system. Why? They bring in more mutations. They do that. So then Neanderthals had larger genomes than we did. Well, what does that mean? This means that they had more transposable elements, they could jump around and create more mutations. There's another example. And then we finally get into one of the things. Where did they live? Why would they live in caves? Well, caves become an instant home when you move somewhere. Let's say you're migrating and it's snowing and it's cold everywhere you look, wherever you go. Well, you have to kill a mammoth to be able to get its hide and to build a fort to even live in. Or what's going to be easier? You just walk along and you see a cave and you walk in it and there's no wind, no snow, no nothing. It's a free home. So this, of course, that's the first thing early people would have ever done, because you either got to chop down trees and while you're hunting for food and trying to survive, or you just walk into a cave. So obviously the cave is the easiest and most logical choice. So mine was like, okay, well, let's look at a map and see what some of the first people and oldest fossils that we have. Well, guess what? This map is what I found online. It's found on Science Direct. It's one of the world's oldest hominins sapien fossils found, and it lists all of them. So I decided, okay, let's take a look at some of the most radioactive rock in the world. And guess what? There's a map for that. And this map here's the entirety of the map. It is this. This is what it actually looks like. I'm going to zoom in to help everybody, so I go more directly in Africa with this one. So what I did is I took this map and I overlaid it with this new map. And guess what? It fits perfect. They are the regions that we're seeing. As you can see, I'm zooming in. The regions that they found these people in are literally over the most exposed radiogenic rock on Earth. The very areas that they were living were the very areas that were killing them. So they were living inside of rocks or inside of caves, which rocks were emitting radiation that was literally speeding up their mutation rate as they slept at night. And then if they left during the day, they were living in harsh conditions in small populations group. They were eating a nutrient deficient diet, which was causing more mutations. They were inbreeding with one another, causing more mutations. They were lacking vitamin D, which was causing more mutations. They were literally dooming themselves by like all of these things put together.
And all of these things that you're saying is making them that much more genetically distinct than other groups that are not associated with them. And they went extinct. So we've had what? Thousands of years to change genetically as well. Is it really a surprise that phylogenetically, or in terms of nesting patterns or DNA differences, is it really a surprise that they have some differences, Matt? No.
It should be expected, actually. And the reason it should be expected is because of these weird conditions. We're taking people outside of what's normal and we're putting them in strange areas. What do we do in a laboratory? We do exactly the same thing. We take bacteria, we put them in an aquarium, we change their diet, we change the environment, and we change their breeding structure. And what do we get? We get adaptive radiation. We get new mutations occurring that normally don't. That's how we experiment. So the Earth was an experimental bottleneck. We have areas where it was good, the Fertile Crescent. There's a reason it's called the Fertile Crescent. And then we have outside of that, there's ice ages. Good areas, bad areas. Neanderthals went to bad areas. Really simple, people.
And they were closer to the flood. And so in many ways, they would have retained a lot of those robust features, which we see, Matt, and they would have had more longevity genes. They would have been different in many ways. And at the same time, they're becoming more and more inbred because they're isolated. They're accumulating more mutations. More mutations are becoming fixed in the genome, making them that much more genetically distinct and unique. And even many in the world of paleoanthropology, I've listened to many lectures and I've heard many lecturers, non-young Earth creationists, admit that Neanderthals are us. They're fully human, but they are adapted to a cold ecoglacial environment. And brother Sydney Raptor says this: what is the scientific evidence for Neanderthalensis living within the last 6,000 years? Well, one, we actually have their DNA. If Neanderthals went back hundreds of thousands of years ago, we should not have intact, readable, understandable DNA where we can actually get some legit data. Okay, so the fact that we can get DNA in the same way that we have the presence of biomolecules in many fossils, many dinosaur fossils. We've got collagen, for example. We have these preserved tissues that should not be preserved the way they are if dinosaurs go back millions of years, and in terms of Neanderthal, if they go back hundreds of thousands. So Matt, what would you say? The fact that we actually have their DNA at all tells us that they're young.
Yeah, that would be a great one. I have two other answers as well. One, we found that mammoth lived more recently because of the soil that they were found on, right? So we found some mammoth, they were frozen and they lived in this region and they were just dated at about 4,000 years old. Now, how were they dated? Why were they dated that? We can get into all this. However, we're just showing that the very food source that they were eating that supposedly died off hundreds of thousands of years ago are actually living until very recent times, even according to their own theory. So why would they be more of a survivable species than the humans that were eating them? And these were kind of not very high on the food chain. We're talking about the mammoth were consumed by the cave bear. They were hunted by woolly rhinoceros. They were killed by a lot of different things. And humans, the Neanderthal didn't do as good. Why is that? Well, we know because of their highly mutating and dwindling populations that they died out. But they're going to find the exact same thing with Neanderthal, that as soon as they find them and they test dirt underneath them, they go, oh, look at that. They're more recent than we ever suspected. And one of the main reasons that we know they were really young, which is quite easy. Oh, I just moved something. I'm going to show you right now. I'm going to go over to this, and I am going to show you this study. This integration shows us that there is no possible way that Neanderthals could have lived for more than 10,000 years. Remember, they supposedly lived 400,000 years. And this is a study that you can find in the peer-reviewed published literature that shows, based on the population size, their maximum life extension would have probably been around 900 years on Earth. Wow. Now, what do we say? Neanderthals were around for about 1,000 years. What are the odds that it fits so perfectly with how long and then how rapidly, just after 10 to 20 generations, less than 600 years, you get the amount of DNA that we have inside of us today? And it happened quick. Within that amount of generations, they have the exact same proportions of genetic similarity.
And the fact that we have their DNA in us, where some humans are part DNA or part Neanderthal, tells us that we interbred with them, we intermingled with them, we were able to produce fertile offspring. They were fully human. By the definition of the biological definition of species, we're the same species. And here's another point, and then Matt, continue, because this is great. If the evolutionary model is true, we should not have been interfertile with them. Think about it. You have the out of Africa scenario where you have Erectus leaves Africa, right? So Erectus leaves Africa. I think your mic was making some noise there, or maybe if it's being moved around, but it's good now. So you have your first out of Africa event, apparently, according to the story. Erectus leaves, evolves independently outside of Africa into what? Heidelbergensis, Neanderthals, Denisovans, elsewhere evolves into Hobbit, Naledi. And then Erectus in Africa, those in Africa evolve into modern Homo sapiens. Okay, what does that mean, brother? You have population of Erectus in Africa that's evolving independently into humans, Homo sapiens. Then outside of Africa, they're evolving into Heidelbergensis and Neanderthals. So hundreds of thousands of years are going by, apparently. Then humans, Homo sapiens, leave Africa, meet up with Neanderthals. Oh, wow, what a surprise. We didn't know there was anybody else existing on the planet other than us, in terms of humans. They intermingle, interbreed, and produced fertile offspring.
Impossible.
Even though they were separated by hundreds of thousands of years.
Yeah,
that means
impossible.
Right.
Under the evolutionary theory, we shouldn't even have been able to mate with Australian Aboriginals because that was 50,000 years. We shouldn't be able to do it at all based on speciation and the amount of time. So the fact we can with all of them, it just shows you right there. It's not in favor of evolution at all, based on their own criteria.
Right there's a mic drop. So Sydney Raptor, you should be a young Earth creationist if you're open-minded. So great question. Sydney Raptor has asked, what is the scientific evidence for Neanderthalensis living within the last 6,000 years? There's several irrefutable arguments, but what you just said, they should not have been able to mate with them Now, of course, they can mate, they can do the act, but they should not have been able to produce fertile offspring because they would have been separated and isolated for so long that the capabilities should not have been there. They should have been two genetically distinct. So that tells us, no, they were only separated by what? Matt, you said Neanderthals probably existed here for about 1,000 years, right? After the flood. Yeah, that makes sense. That's a relatively short amount of time. But hundreds of thousands of years of separation? No, not a chance, brother.
Never going to happen. Not with that population size. And remember, we're going to the secular literature for all of this. And it all confirms exactly what we've been saying all along about Neanderthal. The timeline, the breeding, all of it. And I like this because here we go. Another evolutionary anthropologist right here admitting Neanderthals, traditionally designated Homo sapien neanderthalensis, were not only human, but it also turns out more modern than scientists previously allowed. What do you mean allowed? I like their wording, don't you? You don't even allow that phrase, same species, to come into the context of this. Evolution is true regardless. But Neanderthals were highly intelligent, able to adapt to a variety of ecological zones, and capable of developing highly functional tools to help them do so. They were quite accomplished. Oh, what a surprise. You mean what we've been saying all along? Remember what they said about them? They were designated Homo stupidus when they were first found. Another miserable falsification of evolution in the very beginning.
Wow. That was legit. Homo stupidus?
Yep, that's what they were. That's what they were taxonomically named when they were found. Proposed by Ernest Haeckel, of all people. Remember the embryological guy?
Right. You see how evolutionary science actually hinders science? Evolutionary thinking hinders scientific advancement, where you have 100 years ago, Neanderthal presented as this half ape, half man, exactly right there, this brutish type creature. But then today you see representations of Neanderthal. And if you put a nice professional looking suit on a Neanderthal and had him walk around the city where you are, you wouldn't even tell the difference.
Yeah. Oh, look, apparently we're making random assertions and just speculating.
Watch this, Matt. Hey, look at Sydney Raptor. Sydney says, I'll address the lack of direct positive evidence, the secondary bad correlative speculation and assertions in the comments later. No, you could provide your arguments now, because what these keyboard warriors do is they think that they're going to go leave these massive comments and we're just sitting here with nothing to do all day. Okay. Even though we're doing 12 hours minimum a day of young earth creation related work, and they think we're just going to spend the majority of our day in the comment sections.
Well, he's also got to go look up on how to respond to us. He doesn't know how to do it right now, or else he would.
Yeah, you know what? I should almost post the StreamYard link right now for Sydney Raptor. Let's go. Let's tango on the science, buddy. Okay, because what Sydney needs to do is he needs to go find a rescue device, and then he's going to leave this massive wall comment to the critics. Just because you leave a wall comment and then you don't get a response, it's not because you won. It's not because you have an argument that's irrefutable. It's because nobody's got the time to go respond to your novel. But when we do open mics or these live responses, or where we interact with you guys, now's the opportunity. Give your rebuttal. There's nothing they can say. We've literally demonstrated, Matt, 20 different ways for why Neanderthal have more, how they're genetically unique or different than extant humans. And there's no good rebuttal that they could offer to that other than a rescue device or an assertion. So yeah, Sydney, you go run along. It sounds like he's running, in my opinion.
It's okay. He'll be arguing against his own scientist anyway, because I've got all of this from the published peer-reviewed literature. So this is what's ironic about the critics, is they end up fighting their own scientists and not realizing it. Because me and you don't go to creationist content. Right. I don't go to Answers in Genesis to find my answers. I go strictly to the peer-reviewed published papers. And that's what's awesome.
Look at all of our stuff on Neanderthals so far, right from the conventional literature. Look at the entirety, for the most part, of our ERV rebuttals, all backed up by the conventional literature.
Everyone. Yep.
Have a look at my book. Look at our presentation.
Matter of fact, it has to be, because you're the only one actually doing research on ERVs. Where are you going to go for it?
and have a look. Right from the conventional literature, these guys in the scientists, they don't even realizing they're demolishing their own argument. Notice this, Sydney Raptor. Unlike you, pair, I check my sources and provide citations. More assertions, right? This is an emotional argument. He has no counter. That's why if he was here in an open mic, he'd be sitting there silent. He'd have no answer. He's the kind of guy that's going to go and leave a wall comment. Rather than admitting he's wrong, he's going to go to his favorite evolutionist, try and find an answer, but he's not going to get an answer. So he's going to have to what? Dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge, the 5 Ds of evolutionary dodgeball. We've demolished the Neanderthal challenge. Okay. They've got nothing worthwhile to answer that with, Matt.
Just like RJ Downer, he did the same thing. Remember? He said, you guys don't agree with the consensus at the very end of this study. It doesn't agree with your young Earth creation.
Right.
Oh, you think? You
just
think they're
proving how biased they are, Matt? Just proving what biased, unobjective people they are, brother. They don't know how to read between the lines, like Mark Reed, right? He has no rebuttal to anything we say. His only response, if we're going to call it that, is, oh, that paper that you're presenting, the authors don't agree with your creation position. Of course. Do you really think they're going to get their paper published? Okay, let's say the paper that I love, 2022, 2023, on ERV switching sides. That paper, I recommend everybody read it. It's long, it's comprehensive, it's perfect. It explains why ERVs look like retroviruses. It goes over their many functional roles. Okay. And they have no good explanation for those functions other than just asserting co-option. Okay. So yeah, of course, they're going to have to maintain the evolutionary position, because if they argue for a creation position in these papers, guess what, Matt? Those papers aren't going to be published. Okay. So yeah, they can question in these papers little aspects of the evolutionary model, but they can't question the bigger picture, or else they're not going to get published. So these evolutionists that don't have any critical thinking skills and just blindly believe what the evolutionary scientists are telling them, okay, they will just assume that, well, they said these functions were co-opted. They asserted co-option, so co-option must be true. No, God, that shows, again, a lack of ability to read between the lines. We're looking at the data in these papers, but what we're contesting, what we're debating, is the conclusions or interpretation of that data. We're saying, here's the data in these papers, but the better conclusion or interpretation is that of the creation position. Matt, go ahead, brother.
Sure. His next comment was about claiming DNA cannot last millions or last more than X amount of time is not evidence. It's just an assertion. Well, here's the thing about DNA. They did a maximum shelf life of DNA from Egyptian mummies, and the half-life wasn't very long. It wasn't a million years. Now, how you can get older was based on temperature. The colder you can make DNA, it is true, the more you can preserve it. We got to remember, Neanderthals were living on the south side of Europe, which then, sure, was an ice age, but it's not now. So how could their DNA, which hadn't been preserved in ice for at least, I think, 15,000 years, might have been the end of an ice age, according to some models? We'll give it that. That's the earliest, right? Okay, so 15,000 years, their DNA has been eroding without any preservation of ice. How could it last that long if the Egyptian mummies showed us that DNA starts to degrade after just 1,000 or so years, fairly rapidly? So that's what he's saying, is that there might be, but the preservation required for Neanderthals to be preserved that long doesn't help the cause of evolution at all.
I want Sydney, and maybe this exists, Matt, great points. I want the evolutionists to show me where they predicted that they would find intact DNA that we can actually get good data from in these so-called hominins. Okay, because the burden of proof is on them. Show us how DNA can be preserved for hundreds of thousands of years. Did they predict it? Was this an obvious find, Matt? Do you think evolutionists predicted, well, you know what? Eventually, when we go looking for it, we will find intact DNA in these hominins. Okay. Maybe they did predict it. I doubt it, but maybe they did. Okay. But what they do is they retrofit, right, Matt? You were mentioning this earlier.
Right.
Retrodictions.
Right.
The data comes about, the evidence comes about. So now they have to retrofit it, just like the Y chromosome. Did they predict that the human and chimpanzee Y chromosomes would be less than 30% the same? No. Did they predict that they would find collagen and these other preservations that are found in fossils that are millions and millions of years old? Okay, Dr. Brian Thomas, in his presentation, I challenge any evolutionist to go refute that presentation word for word. Okay. He demonstrated that these incredible preservations are found basically in every layer in the geological rock strata, if I remember correctly. And he even pointed out that there's, even in your perfect and most ideal conditions, collagen could only be preserved up to, and I can't remember the exact amount of time, but it was far less than what we actually find these biomolecules and these just truly amazing preservations in. And so my question is, how can you get original tissues, original proteins, DNA like in Neanderthals, lasting for millions and millions and millions of years based on what we know about biochemistry? Because the biochemistry is putting a limit on how long we will be able to find these preservations. It's not looking well for evolution or the old Earth model, Matt.
No, a matter of fact, I just decided to look up the new evidence for Neanderthals, and guess what? The number has dropped yet again. The most modern Neanderthal that was found, based on looking at the fossil record, of course, because that's where they have to date them. They're not dating the fossils directly, was 40,000 years old. Well, now they found one at Gibraltar, and it's dropped it down to 24,000 now. So it's almost lost half of its life. So, 24,000 years ago, it's going to keep dropping. And that's what we predict. Now, we also have to remember, how are they dating these guys? What's going on? Like, are we dating these are they dating the soil, because they have to use carbon dating for that? And are they using a different type of radiometric dating, which is always going to give an old age because they kind of have to.
Right.
So that's another criteria. So how are they dating these things? Because they, like you said, they didn't predict any of this stuff. They just keep finding the evidence. And then
where did they predict we'd find two people? Adam and Eve. After the fact, what do they invoke? Coalescence. Yeah. Even though what we should find is multiple lineages. Okay. You should find multiple mitochondrial DNA lineages if evolution is true, because what was not true historically was random mating. No, back then you're going to have tribes largely intermarrying and intermingling and having kids within those tribes. You're not going to have random mating with people in Australia and people in Africa. No, people are going to be isolated in their tribes and their people groups. So at the end of the day, you should find multiple lineages, not just one of the Y chromosome and one of the mitochondrial DNA. So Matt, you nailed it. Where do we find these predictions? Rather than just retrofitting all of this, where did they predict? Let's ask Sydney right now. And again, perhaps they did. Prove us wrong. Okay. Sydney Raptor, show us a paper where they predicted that, okay, when we look for it in these so-called hominins, Neanderthal, Denisovan, Heidelbergensis, we're going to predict that, you know what, even though Neanderthal existed hundreds of thousands of years ago, we're going to find their DNA. It's going to be preserved. We're going to be able to get some good, solid data and reading points from it. And we'll wait. Mag, hey, go ahead, brother. You got a good slide there.
Oh, yeah. No, I was just throwing that up to show the new evidence of how they lowered the age again of Neanderthals to now 24,000 years ago instead of 40.
24,000. 24,000. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. They lost almost 20,000 years. They'll keep dropping it. Don't worry. It'll change again. It always changes. And it changes towards us. You'll notice that every time.
Yes.
Every single time.
Have you noticed that the secular model becomes more and more biblical?
Right. Exactly. And it's not the other way around. It should be going the other way. They shouldn't be finding more evidence to refute us, and there shouldn't be any evidence for us. But it just becomes so much easier for our model to be able to explain these things with this new evidence that comes out. And that's why I have 3 new studies to go over.
Yes. Let's slowly move into that, actually, because we're almost at the hour and a half mark. This has been fun. So I will share my screen on this, and then we're going to wrap up the Neanderthal topic. So this is amazing, brother. It is just such an amazing time to be a creationist. I mean, the conventional every one of our hypotheses, for the most part, unless they're just not novel enough or they're too new for us to do too much research on it. Hypermutation. It's a reality. Here's a paper from 2022. 2 families, known real families, had genetic drivers of germline hypermutation, with fathers carrying damaging genetic variation in what? DNA repair genes. Is that not what we've been saying? That's going to result in more mutations. For 5 of the families, paternal exposure to chemotherapeutic agents before conception was probably a key driver of hypermutation. And guess what? Neanderthals would have been subject to radiation rocks, chemicals in cave environments. We have real-time supporting evidence for this. Environmental exposures in parents, such as ionizing radiation, can influence the number of mutations transmitted to offspring. There's also certain regions in the genome that can be subject to higher mutation rates here. And again, DNA repair genes. Tons of supporting evidence. And so there's no challenge. There's no Neanderthal challenge. Maybe there was, but it's been answered. Okay, so they can deny it all they want, but they're not denying it for evidential reasons. They're denying the answers because of philosophical reasons or on a philosophical basis. So, Matt, let me get one other question here from the audience. Then I want you to discuss your papers. Okay, so our brother Apologetics 101, God bless you. You're doing excellent work over at your ministry. Please continue doing what you're doing, and we look forward to partnering again with you. Question for Matt. Are you open to other heat problem models? So you've got your own explanation. I think it's a powerful one, Matt. Your book, Radioactive Decay. Again, you've done debates on it. We did a nearly 3-hour video response to Gutsy Gibbon. I think you've defended it well. Of course, there's other heat problem models. Are you open to any of those?
Yeah, I only want to learn, because what if there's a better answer than mine? I mean, you never stop learning. That's what's cool about science. See, we're not dogmatic. We want to learn more, because by learning more and asking the questions, why is there a heat problem? Does there have to be one? That's what drove me to find the answer, because here's what happened. Donny and I like to write books, but we can't just constantly be writing, especially overlapping each other. What if he wanted to write a book on Neanderthals? I said, no, I want to. Well, now we're going to have, like, what are we going to team up? I'm not going to know what he's writing about. It's going to be a pain. So he's like, no, I want to take one. I want endogenous retroviruses.
ERVs.
I'll say, okay, I'll do radiometric dating. That's what got me into looking at the heat problem, because I didn't even want to. I wanted to be able to answer how old the Earth was radiometrically. And it got me into the heat problem, which ended up getting solved. That was the ironic part of this, is it wasn't even the goal of the book. So kind of cool in a way. And it also got me to...
It's very similar to, and I'm sorry to cut you off. Feel free to continue. But what you said is so important. And that's the joy of these research projects and writing books, is you oftentimes come to a conclusion that you weren't expecting, like with ERVs. What have we been discussing now for the last little while? I just put an entire presentation on it. Studying ERVs, refuting ERVs as evidence for evolution has resulted in a superior model. The origin of retroviruses in general. And then I look at the conventional literature. What are virologists saying in their papers, in their lectures? And even they are now admitting that retroviruses, harmful retroviruses, originated from pre-existing retro elements, confirming the creation model. And these are conclusions you never could have even dreamed of prior to that research project. And in your case, Matt, what was the result, one of the results, a nice, elegant solution to the heat problem. Go ahead, brother. Continue.
Yeah, and another cool one was the Oklo reactor. That was a great chapter in the book because young Earth creationists don't really talk about that subject. So I really like that one as well. I noticed that the critic said that you didn't give a direct line of evidence showing Neanderthal lived 6,000 years ago. He actually did in the form of decay from DNA. And you said, but it's not mimicking an Egyptian environment of that. You're right. And here's the even crazier part. The Egyptians were mummified using salt, which actually preserves DNA even better. So the fact that it can't last long, even preserved in salt, makes it even worse. So we have a video on dinosaurs that me and you did. Remember that one? The dinosaur debate, it was called. And it was filmed. It was actually recorded with this horrible idea I had where I turned us into cartoons. And that was so much work for literally nothing. It was garbage. But in it,
it's been a lot of trial and error, brother.
Yeah.
But those classic videos are fun to go look back on. You know, I still recommend people go take a deep dive into our material from like 4 years ago, 5 years ago, because a lot of those videos to this day, Matt, that you edited together, they're still pretty epic.
They were detailed. I pulled out all the stuff. I spent days and weeks making some of these videos.
Yeah, those are the pre-AI days, right? Remember that series we did, Biblical Creation Moments? Biblical Creation Moments 1, 2, 3. You know, people can still go and get a lot of good information from those. And so, Matt, I got a question for you, brother. You have been working on several articles, okay, for the website. As people know, we have our Truth in Research division. And we've got a lot of different divisions at SFT. We got the debate division, the Truth in Research division, okay, to name a couple. And we've posted some major studies here. And we've got a slew of articles that are currently being peer reviewed and edited. So we're probably going to have a whole bunch published at once. It's not always easy. It definitely takes a lot of work. So for those that want to support our continued efforts, greatly appreciated, that's for sure. And so Matt himself has several, with one major Truth in Research publication, and it's got some fantastic information, makes some amazing predictions on Neanderthals and other hominins. And so, Matt, why don't you take some time, brother, and give us a rundown of your several articles, including your major research paper.
Okay, sure. We're going to look at probably 3 of them if we have time. The Echoes of Creation, A Flood of Deletions, and the Overflow of Mutations. Now, what I did with these predictions is I went to the DNA barcoding website, which you can identify species. It's like the cheapest way for them to now identify pretty much all life. They've categorized hundreds of thousands, if not a million species at this point, and they keep adding to it all the time. And I love this database because you can just go and type in, go to the data portal, launch it, type in whatever you're looking for, type in like Homo, it'll give you all of the different hominids you can type in, and it specifically goes into the CO1 region, which is the most conserved region of the mitochondria and the protein coding region. And they can go into different species, and they can look at the whole base pair is about 1,500 base pairs in most, but they only look at the first 650. So what you're going to do is you're going to go into that website and look for the sequence called the CO1-5P. You can highlight this area, and you can take it over and you can paste it in and compare it to all different things. So this is a human one. And what you can do is you can go to the PAN is for chimpanzee, and you can highlight theirs and you can compare the two to see how related they are. Now, this is really nice because this is the most conserved region, which means it's the best to compare going backwards in time to see what genetic relation there should be. So what you can do is you can compare all of the different chimpanzees together to get a consensus sequence. And this brings us to our first prediction that I made called the echo of creation. And I wanted to make this one fun. So I added some visual things like this for you guys. Don't really know why, but makes it more fun. This prediction basically echoes mankind's recent creation of God's image and predicts that if you go backwards in time, hominids, the human line, doesn't get more primitive and related to chimpanzees as it should be. Rather, you're going to find the opposite is actually true, and we're going to be genetically about the same age. Why? Because it's all recent. So there will not be a convergence on a common ancestor going backwards in time. So therefore, what do we see in the evolutionary charts? Well, we see, look at that. In the hominid line at the top, there's all kinds of ancestors going back into the common ancestor split, with the pan genius only really being chimpanzee. There's only really one lineage of them going back, and the chimp speciated from the bonobo speciated from the chimpanzee. That's what we should find. This would be the evolutionary chart. Lots of death, but increase over time in mutations, which means diversity is increasing over time. It never stops increasing, ever. So that's the most important thing you got to take into your mind right now. Diversity increases over time. It never stops. Otherwise, evolution would make no sense, because you have to be able to explain the diversity of life on Earth. If there's no diversity, there's no explaining anything. And so what they admit then is they say that comparisons of Neanderthal and modern human DNA suggest that the two lineages diverged from a common ancestor, most likely Heidelbergensis, sometime about 350 to 400,000 years ago. Okay, we're going to go with that. When you go to the DNA barcoding website where we were just at, we're going to take the first specimen and we're going to look at where it was found here in Spain, right there, and we're going to look at how old it was, about 300 to 400,000 years ago. Okay, now we're going to take the next specimen. There's only two, by the way, in this database. Okay, look at this one. Much older, much higher on the map, in a totally different location, and in a very cold region. Spain, they actually even ate different foods. And it dates much older, about 609,000. Now remember, the other one, half that, 300,000 at the low end. So this one's 600. Now, what happens when we compare the two in that region of this CO1 gene? Look at that. It's a 100% identical match. What? How's that even possible, guys? It makes no sense. Why? Because you've got hundreds of thousands of years. You've got a bottleneck that occurred right in between that, according to the evolutionary theory. About 500,000 years ago, there was a global catastrophe of two separate volcanoes, by the way, causing probably two different bottlenecks. And yet there's a genetic identical relation between these two different Heidelbergensis found. That doesn't make any sense, because that's just saying there's no mutative change at all, even through hundreds of thousands of years, small populations, less purifying selection, and through a bottleneck, maybe multiple bottlenecks. Okay, sorry.
Matt, you're saying they should be changing a lot more than what we see?
Yes, they should be changing. You can't go from here living in one region, 600,000 years plus or minus 40,000, migrate to an entirely different region, change your diet, survive a global bottleneck, possibly two of them, change your diet, live down here in Spain 300,000 years later, and then all of a sudden have no mutational differences as your ancestor. That's a stretch. But let's just say, okay, maybe. Let's see then. Let's compare modern humans at the 650 base pair with the CO1 sequence of chimpanzee. 90% similarity when we compare them. Okay, how about Heidelbergensis then? 88%. What's going on? Why in the world would our ancestors be less similar than we are today? Evolutionarily, it makes no sense. It's the exact opposite of what we should. We should be going backwards in time, and our ancestors should be more similar to the common ancestor of chimpanzees, not less similar. We live in the future compared to these ancestors. We should be diverging more. We should be getting more distantly related, not more similar. We're not turning into chimpanzees, are we? This data shows we are getting more similar. Why? What's going on? our ancestors are less similar over 600,000 years of time. Come on. It's just the story doesn't match. It doesn't line up to the evidence. So what happens when we compare us with them? Well, we're 96% similar. Very, very similar. And when we compare Heidelbergensis to us and the chimp, again, they're 88% similar, very different, and we're at 96% similar, which we would expect there to be. It's pretty obvious. So then we go to Neanderthal and chimpanzees. Again, 90% different. About where humans are, modern humans. Interesting. How about modern human and Neanderthal? 98% similar again. High similarity, exactly as expected. Now we get, what is it? Denisovan, 97.23%. All of these show that we're almost identical in genetic relation with our supposed ancestors that lived millions of years ago, hundreds of thousands of years ago, and genetically identical to chimpanzees, with the opposite being the case. Our ancestors are less similar to them than we are. I would like to say that this is going to be the evolutionary rescue device. You can already smell it coming. But maybe, well, what if? Consider this.
Yeah.
I can just see it now.
And then claim that consider this, maybe this, how about this story? And then claim that that's empirical science. Yeah, okay, you can believe in that, capital B. We get it. That's your evolutionary philosophy. But it's not science. As a matter of fact, what is it? It's a science fiction religion, Matt.
Right. Exactly. It doesn't question anything, right? It doesn't question that it could be wrong ever. That's what's so funny. So I like to say, what's going on? Did diversity stop increasing over the 70 million years? Because I want you guys to think about something. Why are we so genetically related to them? The evolutionary answer is, well, because they're our ancestors. Well, what's going on? When did this similarity arise? Well, according to the DNA barcoding, you have two options, and these options aren't good for evolution. They say that diversity has always been increasing. Okay, so if it's always been increasing, we should be a lot less similar than that over that amount of time. So we only have two options. We have the biblical model, which means we got off the ark. We all diverged right away. Different people branched out, and some of them hypermutated until they died. And that's why we're all very similar, related to one another. And that also explains why they're about the same distance away from chimpanzee. If there was an evolutionary chain like this, our ancestors wouldn't be genetically distant the same. You would find the opposite pattern. You would find that they're more similar to the ancestors, and over time we would be diverging. Mutations would be increasing, and we would be less similar as time goes on. We find the opposite.
Yeah, so because mutations, and this is excellent material. I cannot wait for this technical paper to publish, brother, because mutations are adding diversity because they're adding something that was not previously there, right?
Yep, exactly. And then as time goes on, more mutations happen and diversity increases. That's how evolution works. So therefore, how do we know then, going backwards just a little bit, we're going to deviate for just 1 second. How do we know that Neanderthals are just regular people? Because we can make that assertion. We actually can look in the CO1 gene and answer that question. This is looking at the nucleotide based on colors. And at the top right here, the human is on top and Neanderthal is at the bottom. And you can look and see, like, this blue line is not a mutation. And then down here, it's black. So you can see where the mutation actually happened. It was a nucleotide change. A new mutation happened in the Neanderthal that didn't happen in the modern human. And when you flip that mutation away, it lands on the human sequence. It shouldn't do that if we diverged from them, because we would have never shared the same sequence. Interesting, right? So now, how would evolution try to explain that? Because they would have mutations flipping all over the place in different regions that wouldn't match the human sequence whatsoever. And that's not exactly what we see. We see the human sequence appearing underneath those mutations. Interesting, right? So when we look at the entire, well, I wouldn't say that's the entire. I did this one last night. I did the entire 1,500. And then I was like, it's too big for the screen. So I reduced it to the 650. Therefore, you can look at the exact mutations that are turning over in the Neanderthal. It's very interesting because there's so few. And this is a highly conserved region, so they still shouldn't be that many. There's modern humans that have 10, and there's some that have none. So we know what the consensus sequence is, but we don't have the consensus sequence in Neanderthal because we don't have very many samples. So all you have to do is just know that when a mutation turns over in the region of the CO1 gene, it doesn't turn over in the same spot every time. It can be different. That's how we know what a consensus sequence actually is. And this is going to be a future talk I'm going to give on exactly how to determine what a kind is. And the biblical kind is answered with this data. So again, what do we have? We have humans and chimpanzees getting off the ark. We have diversity increasing as it goes until modern day times. Some are rapid, some and ended the species line. Others kept going. The reason humans have such fewer mutations is because we did exactly what God said. And that was be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And therefore, when you do that, natural selection becomes stronger and it can purge a lot of these mutations that were naturally arising that small populations like Denisovan, Neanderthal, Hobbit, they couldn't do. And so they're dead now because of it. Their small populations wasn't good because they didn't follow God's rule. And so I guess I could read this. Neanderthals have about the same sequences as humans do, with around 8 mutations different in one spot. It's basically nothing. It's very easy to answer now that they were related to us because of this really cool data that we have. And then I like to usually explain the phenotypic diversity, that of course their structure in their jaws and their foreheads were a little bit different, with their occipital bun and their skull being a little bit more unique with a larger brow ridge. But all of these are just phenotypic differences. And we would explain that by what happened is they got off the ark and there was an ice age. The ice age caused a lot of phenotypic diversity because the bone structure changed. They got a lot thicker, more hardy. And then there was a global, the warming. The ice age caused the melt off, and the ice age ended and phenotypic diversity changed yet again until modern day times. And of course, diet also played a factor into that. And when we look backwards in time, that's exactly what we see. Ancient humans had massive amounts of more phenotypic diversity within people that all lived in the same region. And that diversity slowly changed over time because Noah would have had more. And then over time, as the environment changed altogether, people would have changed altogether along with it. So we're going to head back now to the study, and we are going to jump into... Oh, okay. So that was my first prediction. It's basically already over. It just basically is showing you that going backwards in time, our ancestors are not more similar to the common ancestor that it should be. We should be getting more dissimilar over time, not more similar to chimpanzees. It makes no sense. And so how can we prove this? 2 separate ways. The first one is going to be called the flood of deletions. And the flood of deletions is a really cool paradox for evolution to ever try to explain. They'll probably never be able to explain it. I've wrapped my head around a possible argument rebuttal that they could have, but we'll see if they figure it out. This prediction postulates that deletions will be found in the ancestors of the supposed human line of ancestors that will falsify this fake line of descent to modern human beings, Denisovan and Neanderthal. So if this is true, if these ancestors had deletions in their genome, which would have always been inherited, and their ancestors don't have them, or their offspring's ancestors don't have them, then it's game over. Well, guess what? That's exactly what we see. We're going to look at the top here. We're going to notice that there's blank spots. You can see the colors and then areas in between where it's just white. Those are deleted areas inside the genome. And a deletion is always inherited, right? It's always passed on. So how come when we look at modern humans today, that region isn't deleted? It's not deleted in Neanderthal. It's not deleted in Denisovan, and it's not deleted in modern humans. How could they have been our ancestors? There is no possible way, because guess what? Some types of mutations, such as deletions or insertion mutations, cannot be reversed as they result in a permanent change in the DNA sequence. So therefore, that tells us that when it's changed, they're never going back. Every offspring would always have it. So if we evolved from them, why don't we have them? We don't have them because evolution is not true. It's literally that simple. It's game over. They've lost a link in the chain leading up to modern human beings. So now, how did they die? Again, we covered this. They lived in relatively small dispersed populations, possibly numbering in the thousands across the entire range during any given period. Not a very big population. So what makes more sense? There was creation. There was a few mutations that happened in both the chimpanzee line and the human line. Then there was a global flood. And then since that time, only a few mutations have occurred. 0 to 20 in the human line and about 62 to 68 in the chimpanzee line. That makes more sense. Evolution now has to try to say that, no, 7 million years has occurred to get those numbers. Well, wait a minute. You can't get 7 million years, and I'll explain why. This gets really bad. So you either have genetic boundaries that can go back to no common ancestor at all, or you try to say that the bottleneck reset genetic diversity and the mutations arose on this side of the bottleneck. Either way, they're in deep trouble, because if they try to say that, then they need to explain where the missing 7 million years went of missing mutations. So if they try to say that it happened on this side of the bottleneck, they're up a river without a paddle. And if they try to say, no, they did, all those mutations did occur all the way up in here, and that's why we're the same, they're also in trouble because of the prior predictions, which shows that our ancestors are more similar than we are today. So either way, big trouble is coming. So the next one will be the overflow of mutations. And this really cool prediction comes from the concept that as mutations accrue in the genome, they build up, and until there's mutation saturation. Mutation saturation occurs, and therefore mutations start turning over in the same spot, so we can't see them anymore. There's no way to count them. Are there any primate species alive on Earth that have no mutations in them? Nope. Chimpanzees, gorilla, orangutan, they all have more, lots. Matter of fact, the lowest would be chimpanzees at around 65 on average. Then gorilla at about 75 to 85, and then the orangutan at Pongo at about 100. So they all have more. So we have more mutations actually going up. There are 0 that have no mutations at all. So we know mutations are increasing. So how long are they increasing? That's the question. That's what we're going to look at now. We can build a chart looking at these differences. We find that all the humans nest down here all together in less than 20 mutation differences. All the primates have massive amounts. The pan having the least at around 63. So not many. And when we look inside, how many would be expected over 7 million years of time? Okay, well, again, if you're going to assume that the bottleneck reset these mutations and only 65 has occurred on average on the chimpanzee, then just looking at chimpanzees, completely ignoring humans, you would get 2,450 mutations in there over 7 million years of time. That means we would have almost no genetic similarity to them at all. Instead, we have lots of genetic similarity. Evolutionists have never asked themselves, why is it so high? How could it be so high? They have to invoke selection, right? That's what they're doing. They're invoking selection, but they're missing millions of years of mutations building up. Because as I said, those nucleotides are 65 between humans and chimps. And when we erase those mutations, they don't converge with chimpanzees. So we have 0 to 10 in living people alive today. We have about 20 if you add Neanderthal and Denisovan into the mix, and about 65 mutations in chimpanzees on average. So let's do the math on that. Okay, so with one bottleneck going back, we go for 10 in humans, and we go 65 in chimps, and we do that every 200,000 years. That's a lot of differences. That's too many differences. Look at that, I'm lagging. I got the pinwheel of death here. Okay, look at that. Between 6 to 7 million years, that's how long ago the split was. We have 200,000 years in every single, not even red arrow. I could have put a lot more red arrows if that was the case. We don't find that many differences. We find very few differences because very little time has passed. And the most important aspect of this is these are genetic boundaries. What is a genetic boundary? It means when you erase those mutations in chimpanzees, where does that lead? Where does that put their ancestor? Does it converge going back 7 million years of time to a human, to the hominid line, which are in humans? It does not. When we compare the Neanderthal, Denisovan, humans, none of those match the chimpanzee consensus sequence. That's what a genetic boundary is. And this is devastating for evolution. Devastating. They never expected it. Researchers found a telltale sign showing that almost all the animals emerged at about the same time as humans. That means that they have to invoke that these differences all arose on this side of the bottleneck. See what I mean? They have to say that. And because that's when modern humans arose, right? 200,000 years ago. So that means all of the differences that we're seeing, the 98.8% relation we have to chimps, all arose in 200,000 years. So it's missing 7 million years of diversity. Big trouble for evolution. Huge trouble. Now, if they try to say, well, it's because maybe it didn't get erased. Maybe the genetic bottleneck didn't reset it. Well, that's a problem too, because now there's genetic boundaries going all the way back 7 million years, and it doesn't converge on the common ancestor. And we have the consensus sequence for the chimp line and the human line, and they don't converge. Evolution is finished. It's completely dead. And that's why the scientists of the study said this conclusion is very surprising, and I fought against it as hard as I could. And this study will never be destroyed. It is the most comprehensive study ever done. And look at what they said. The answer is no, said Stockholm, leader of the author of the study, published in the Human Journal of Evolution. All of the 7.6 billion people, the 500 million house sparrows and 100,000 sandpipers, genetic diversity is about the same. Wait a minute. So we have low genetic diversity. That's
Matt, before you continue,
yeah,
just to give your voice a break for 2 minutes, I want to address a couple of these objections to what you're saying. Sydney Raptor, again, comments like this, proponents of fish to fisherman evolution like this, are a true gift to creation science and what we're saying here. He says, no, creationists need to justify a global bottleneck, of which there is absolutely no credible evidence. So everything we've said over the years, apparently in one ear and out the other, everything you've been saying here, firstly, CO1 gene in the barcoding study that you frequently talk about, the Rockefeller study, shows that all extant species arose at the same time not too long ago. There's low diversity there.
Yep.
Human beings have low diversity in mitochondrial DNA, Y chromosome, and autosomal nuclear DNA. Low diversity in general. The evolutionary community, Sydney failed earlier to meet my challenge. I issued a challenge in this program. Show me where intact DNA that can actually give us good data and reading in Neanderthals was predicted before it was discovered. Here's another challenge. Show me where the evolutionary community predicted that humans would have overall low genetic diversity. God creates two people, Adam and Eve. That restricts levels of genetic diversity. If we've been evolving for hundreds of thousands of years to millions of years, if you want to go back to the Australopithecines, then we should have higher levels of genetic diversity if evolution were true. We find low levels of diversity. And so the evolutionary community, rather than predicting it, they retrofit the data. They come up with a rescue device. It's post hoc ad hoc, the out of Africa population bottleneck. So, Sydney Raptor, we have evidence for a global bottleneck in humans and evidence for a global bottleneck in animals. So it's time that you start giving us some real challenges and begin addressing our points in a sophisticated manner. Matt, what are your thoughts, brother?
We won't get an answer because he's still going to take the scientist making quotes out of context. Like, he's even mad that they quoted Darwin. The modern day scientist that published this study brought up Darwin, and he's like, look at this quote on Darwin. We're not doing it. We're telling you the quotes that these scientists that discovered genetic boundaries, low genetic diversity, and fast mutation rates that prove all life went through a global bottleneck, exactly what you're saying isn't true, explained and said in an article in a journal that's been published. And look at what he just said. Look, remove that comment real quick and look at what this is in a newspaper article, by the way. Look, published in BBC News article online. It is thought we split from a common ancestor with chimps 5 to 6 million years ago, more than enough time for substantial genetic differences to develop. Why aren't they there? Why are we still so genetically related? We shouldn't be. It's perplexing. They're writing it in a news article saying, we don't understand. Why isn't there? So we're just pointing it out. You can be mad at us for pointing it out, but it doesn't really matter because we like to point out to things that are easily falsified. Evolution is easily falsifiable, and we're taking their own literature and showing it to you. Why don't you get mad at them? They're the ones saying these are problems. These are the ones saying that this doesn't make sense. We're giving you an alternative theory that does make sense, that does make accurate, testable predictions, that has gotten it right. We're the ones that said, we're going to find fast mutation rates. Darwin said, you're not even going to be able to find a new finch species for 3,000 years. And he based that on evolution. And he ran the numbers, and he was wrong. It's every 3.3 years or every 2 generations. That's exactly the biblical timeline of how many bird species there are.
We've got these new species, for example, in finches in real time, and at a genetic level, what's going on? How are we getting these new variations? It's shifts in heterozygosity to homozygosity, more allelic variability to less allelic variability. It's all based on the pre-existing diversity that God originally front-loaded at creation. We see epigenetic changes. What we see are, in many ways, species are hitting walls from more levels of heterozygosity to less levels of heterozygosity, which means more levels of homozygosity. Because, Matt, in debates, you see all the time, because creationists will talk about how, well, we get variations within kinds, but those variations are limited. The change is limited. And they'll say, well, what's the limit? Well, the answer is easy. The limit is this: how much available heterozygosity does each species have? Because eventually you're going to get species, or let's say within domestic dogs, a Chihuahua, there's not much allelic variability, is there, Matt, in a Chihuahua?
Runs out.
Right? It runs out. There's your limit. It runs out.
Right. And if you were to take a Chihuahua and bottleneck it and put it on an island to survive, you're going to get a weird looking dog breed, and it's not going to give you the variety that a wolf can. So you're losing it over time.
Yeah, very simple, but it's a very simple answer. That's the limit, is you're going to run out. And just take, like you said, take 2 Chihuahuas, put them on an island, right, Matt? What are you going to get after many generations? You're not going to get a wolf. You're not going to get the kind of variety you would get if you started with 2 wolves that are heterozygous.
Exactly. And that's the problem. Evolution has to be able to explain the novel information being gained. So if we're losing it everywhere we look, they have to now admit that the very example of what young Earth creation says is true. Descent with modification, not ascent. Evolution needs ascent with modification. We don't see it. So they go, we're just descending. Oh, you're just literally saying what the creationists say.
They need vertical changes. They're not getting it. And Matt, we need to thank our good evolutionist-minded friend, Sydney Raptor here. He just admitted that all he has are misrepresentations, speculation, and assertions. Sydney, good for you. You're finally being honest. You're being straight with us. He has admitted that's all he's got. Notice here, misrepresentation, speculation, and assertions. Sydney, good job for finally tapping out. All right, Matt, go ahead, brother. Continue.
Yeah, sure. Quote. I'm writing in the answer right now. I said, here is the article to the news article that was done by the Rockefeller University Thaler, where he said that the genetic boundaries is something that we didn't expect, that Darwin never predicted. So now he can go right to him and say, hey, you need to stop using Darwin. He's way outdated. Tell the scientists themselves. So we can stop quoting the scientists who bring up Darwin, because it's making him upset. So it's okay. Now he can go directly to the scientists, and matter of fact, maybe even to that news article. He can scroll to the bottom and maybe even leave a comment for him. That would be good too. So I say that if mutations are the basis for evolution theory and they can't get those right, what does that tell you about evolution as a whole? They can't get evolution. They can't make predictions on mutations. Nathaniel Jensen challenged him on that years ago at BioLogos. They never came back with a challenge. Remember, he said, pick any animal. I'll let you pick the animal and we'll run the study. Answers in Genesis would even pay for it. They were so uncomfortable and not confident that they couldn't do it based on evolution that they ignored the challenge completely. And it will always go unanswered because you will never get a mutation rate that points to evolution being true. Case closed. They can't answer mutations. Evolution is finished. They can't answer it. It's game over.
That study alone that you just went over briefly, people are going to have the opportunity, hopefully soon, to read the whole study. But that's some truly fascinating data right there, Matt.
It'll be fun to see what they say. Yeah.
Well, as Sydney Raptor pointed out, what they can say are based on assertion, speculation, misrepresentation.
You know what's really cool about that that genetic boundary study too is they were so perplexed at how everything could be bottlenecked. They were like, how in the world can like all of life go through a bottleneck? They had to say like, well, maybe it was destroyed by a meteor impact. That was their kind of a go-to argument there for a little while. And the scientists themselves went to the fossil record to look for it. Oh, wait, here's one of their quotes. Look, did herring really pass through an equally recent population bottleneck? Anchovies too? And they even question it right here. All species show the same lack of barcode diversity, meaning everything had low genetic diversity in it, not high like expected. So although it's easy to imagine that humans passed through a bottleneck 170,000 years ago, it's hard to believe that the exact same thing happened in all species, including aquatic. What could kill a volcano? Can't kill all aquatic life. It can't kill all land life. It can't kill, like, that's what they're saying. I could understand humans being affected,
Right,
but
right.
all animal life and all aquatic life, like, they're so perplexed by it, they'll never understand.
But
They'll
Matt,
never get it.
the study says 170,000 years ago. That's not that's not 4,500 years. How do you address that?
Easy. The study wasn't trying to give a date. That's their assumed date based on evolution being true. A mutation rate comes from a pedigree germline mutation rate. This study was about DNA barcoding and looking at what is related and what is not, and what was the genetic diversity. They found it was low in everything. So they go, wow, we didn't see that coming. I wonder what's related. Is this butterfly related to that one? Or what about wolves? Are they related to dogs? And then they started finding genetic boundaries and things they never expected to find. That was what was the best part about the study. It wasn't about the dates. The dates are just the evolutionary assumption in the study, which can be thrown away because we know from actual studies to determine actual age that the observed rates are up here and the evolutionary assumption rates are down here. This is from the published literature. This is what actually is seen in these mutation rates. So there's no assumption. You don't have to go to a study that's not based on mutation rates to get a date for something. That's ridiculous. It's like reading a book on how to fix your car by, reading a cooking book. It makes no sense. You don't go there for that. They're just going to throw all kinds of things in those books.
And if you want to go with dates for things, well, as we've demonstrated many times, right, Matt, you can go into just countless reasons why they don't have the hundreds of thousands to millions of years. Like Sydney Raptor earlier was saying, oh, well, this team dated some Neanderthals at 40,000 years. You don't have 40,000 years. We have helium diffusion, for example. Okay, Dr. Russell Humphreys, here's a paper here, because you'll find, especially a lot of ill-informed critics of young Earth creation, let's say old Earth creationists and theistic evolutionists, they'll say you guys don't have any scientific evidence that gives exactly 6,000 years. Yes, we do. Mutation rates, genetic diversity that you've talked about, right, Matt? Then you've got helium in zircon crystals, that the abundance that we find shouldn't be there. Helium is a very slippery molecule. Zircon crystals are supposedly billions of years old. And so that helium should have been released, most of it into the atmosphere. If the zircon crystals really are billions of years old, we know the rate as to which helium diffuses. And so we find far too much helium. And Dr. Russell Humphreys did the work. Okay. He looked at helium diffusion rates. And if you actually read this paper, most critics probably haven't. They don't even know it exists. Dr. Russell Humphreys got empirically an age of the Earth going back, guess what, Matt? 6 to 10,000 years. So we have biological and genetic data that put humans back 6,000 years. And I've heard many old Earth creationists, they'll say, well, okay, we'll give you humans going back 6,000 years. What about the Earth? What about the universe? Here you go. You got helium and zircon crystals. Dr. Russell Humphreys did the work, did the math, okay, put in the effort, and he's got a technical paper here, helium diffusion rates, and they go back 6,000 years. Okay.
Yep.
So, and here's the excerpt right here. Though the rocks contain 1.5 billion years worth of nuclear decay products, newly measured rates of helium loss from zircon show that the helium has been leaking for only 6,000 plus or minus 2,000. You got 6,000 to 10,000 years. We got supernova remnants, right, Matt? Not enough supernova remnants if the universe is as old, or our solar system specifically is as old as they say. Yet the nearby parts of our galaxy in which we could observe such gas and dust shells contain only about 200 supernova remnants. Notice this, Matt. That number is consistent with only about 7,000 years worth of supernovas. So we got 6,000 years based on biological and genetic data for humans and life. We've got 6,000 years, 6 to 10,000 for rocks for the Earth, right? Helium and zircon. And now we got in the solar system supernova remnants, 7,000. So do you see how everything correlates to what? A young Earth, young humans, young life, a young universe. We've got evidence for 6,000 years in essentially all your fields of science.
And what you just covered is only a handful of things as well, because we can also go to the Proton 21 laboratories, which was discussed earlier, that shows that the radioactive elements that formed like they are today, not as they were millions or billions of years ago. We also have large solar systems that were found on the edge of the universe, predicted by Jason Lyle, who predicted based on young Earth creation being true. That was found by the James Webb telescope last year. And then we have population growth rates, which match the biblical flood timeline. We have migration patterns. We have speciation rates that also match the exact same time. We have unbroken chains of genealogies that go back to the same time frame. In science, this is called statistical probability, or p-value, and that's what makes something more probable in being true. So if everything is pointing to the same correlated thing, why not believe it's true just because it doesn't match the concept of deep time evolution? See what I mean? You named a few, and there's tons more. Is so many more. Where are all the missing fossils that are supposed to be there? They think Tyrannosaurus Rex, there should have been billions of them. We find a handful. We find 100, 200 of them, something small. Exactly how many we would expect there to be in a timeline. That's why they have so many paradoxes in their model. Everything fits ours so good. It's just unbelievable. But you can keep believing unfalsifiable nonsense all you want. We don't really care, because our goal is to reach people that have an open mind, a scientific mindset that questions things. When you're just dogmatic and rooted in something and don't want it to be true because it fits a biblical narrative, your mind's already rotted out and made up its choice anyway. So it's like, why are you even doing this? One, you're wasting your life on a subject you say doesn't matter and you don't care about. We make no impact in the scientific field anyway. So why are you here? It makes no sense. Just go live your life, play a video game, do something fun. Why are you around something that makes you miserable? Why are you listening to something that you're disgusted by and it makes you so angry to listen to it? Makes no sense.
It's because they enjoy giving us gifts to biblical creation science. Notice this, Sydney Raptor. It's like an auto response, auto evolutionist troll response. And we love it because we've refuted these arguments over and over again. Notice this, Matt. A linear simple equation of mutation rates does not take into account numerous factors such as natural selection. We've accounted for selection. Okay. We also know that the per generation rate, even though many in the evolutionist camp don't want to acknowledge the fact that the observed mutation rate does approximate the fixation rate, even in the evolutionary model. Okay. Fixation is basically zero now. Okay. People are spread out in all parts of the globe. There's roughly 7 to 8 billion people on the planet. But guess what? For most of evolutionary history, humans exist in isolated small populations and a small overall population in Africa for thousands of years. So fixation would have been faster in the past. That's why basic population genetics tells us that the per generation rate approximates the fixation rate. Guess what? The per generation rate for the mitochondrial DNA and the Y chromosome are fast. Okay. And that rate approximates the fixation rate. We account for selection. You can have selection. Okay. But you're still going to have a fast per generation rate here and approximating the long-term substitution rate. But here's the thing. As creationists, we're not really concerned with species-wide change. We're concerned with this. We have the Eve consensus sequence. Okay. We know on average, Matt, any two people, let's say in the mitochondrial DNA, differ by only a few mutations, roughly 20 to 30 on average, about 120 max. That's trivial. So the question is, how long does it take to accumulate just a few DNA differences, okay, from a consensus sequence, essentially? And the same thing goes for the Y chromosome. We're separated by more men, that is, in the Y chromosome. But guess what? Your Y chromosome's larger. The mitochondrial DNA is about 16,500 letters long. The Y chromosome is about 65 million DNA letters long. Okay, so even a few hundred on average in the Y chromosome is barely nothing. So how long does it take to accumulate those differences? Not a long time at all in light of the fast mutation rate. And we know that mutation rates are not necessarily constant. We can see this in Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA phylogenetic trees. We can see that the branches differ in size. They go back to a common ancestor. That means some people are picking up more mutations in the same amount of time than their cousins. Okay. So Sydney Raptor, these arguments don't work. Okay. You've got, even in the creation model, you have from the flood to the Babel dispersal event, faster rates of fixation because the population is small. It starts off as 8. You got 3 reproducing couples, Shem, Ham, Japheth, and their 3 wives. Okay. Some have said, oh, well, fixation's not going to be faster. It's going to be negligible from the flood to Babel because you have a rapidly expanding population. But how do you know? Yeah, God said, be fruitful and multiply. Okay, can you say for sure how rapidly that population was expanding? Maybe they expanded and then they were stable for a while and hung out around Babel, and then they moved out into all parts of the globe. You can't prove that it expanded rapidly enough to the point where you don't have faster rates of fixation. There's a lot of assumptions and guesswork there because the Bible is largely silent in terms of how big the population was at Babel, how quickly it expanded. What we do know, though, is the population was smaller and it was isolated because people did not spread out until the languages were confused and the Babel dispersal event. Okay, so there's a lot there, Matt, and I wanted to fill the air as you were, getting refreshed there. But Matt, what are your thoughts?
Sorry, kid ate it. He hit his head on the door.
Oh no, I hope he's okay.
He's fine. They're young.
He's strong like his dad. He's strong like his dad. So think about that, Matt. Faster rates of fixation from the flood to Babel. But some people say, well, it would be negligible because the population's expanding rapidly. Okay, be fruitful and multiply. But how can you say for sure? The Bible's pretty silent. From the flood to Babel, you could have an expanding population and then maybe it becomes stable and doesn't really expand until the spreading out at Babel. I mean, how can you say for sure that, well, it's just expanding so much to the point where fixation's not faster? There seems to be a lot of guesswork there. Maybe I'm missing something. But the point is, during that time period, let's say that few hundred years, you would have a smaller population that's isolated because they're not spread out into all parts of the globe. I'm curious as to your thoughts on that, brother.
Actually, there would be 3 separate populations because there were 3 separate sons who inherited different lands. In the book of Jubilees, it mentions that. Sorry, what?
Shem, Ham, Japheth, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And their sons, it says, went off the mountain and built their own cities and named them after their wives. So we already have 3 separate population of groups of people separated, not staying together. So their separation already divided the groups, so where there would already be 3 separate smaller populations that would now be, forming different haplogroups, L, M, and N. So then we can track,
but these populations would still be geographically restricted,
right?
Because they're not spread out into all parts of the globe until the languages are confused, right?
Correct. Exactly. They would all be
Okay.
on one mountain on different sides of it, apparently.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And
So
then
if that hypothesis is true, which you're saying, we'd have to take the Book of Jubilees account at face value. Some would probably contest that, but let's just treat that as a working hypothesis. Okay. What would that mean about fixation?
it would mean there's faster fixation already in the very beginning, because you've just taken the population and broken it already from a smaller one into 3 small ones. So now you have different populations growing at different rates and not intermingling too much with each other, as we would imagine. Who knows? And then as those populations were growing, after about 6 to 7 generations, we have a meeting where all of the people gather together to now build a larger tower, and they converge on one another. And now they're meeting and they're all speaking the same language, because they would have had the same language.
There's going to be a convergence where those lineages come together at Babel?
Right. Exactly.
Okay. I see what you're saying. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Now we have a convergence,
that
and they're all
flows.
gathered
That flows.
Right. And now, guess what? They're converging. So they all now take their different farming, their building, their knowledge, they combine it, and they start building a tower, all of the different people.
So are you saying the Earth repopulates with 3 reproducing couples? They diverge, but still in a geographically isolated region of the Earth. They diverge into those 3 lineages, but then they end up converging at Babel and come together with resources and their skills and so on and so forth. They're all speaking the same language still. And then you'd have faster rates of fixation there. And then they spread out, and then fixation becomes slower.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
Exactly. Because now you have a larger population and it's all together. And then right when it's going to be harder to reach fixation, because now you've got maybe 75,000 people, all of a sudden now the languages are confused. And the Bible now says there are 75 languages, somewhere around there. So now we have 75 languages in different groups. So we know there's at least 75 different groups. It could be even more, not based on language, but those groups could be broken into groups, because now they have inherited new lands. Ham's line, Africa, Shem's line, Asia, and then Japheth, Northern Europe. So we have all groups of different people diverging and splitting off and branching into the new regions. Now, guess what? What would we expect to see from that? We would expect to see, if this was true, that the divergence group of people all were somewhere in the Middle East region when this dispersion happened. And now all of a sudden these small groups of people form again, and maybe groups of 12 or 24. And what would happen? Now we're restarting genetic fixation all over again, with new families reaching fixation really quick as they begin to diverge and split from this region. And we would see that in the genetics. And what do we see? We see exactly that, which I'll show you right in a minute. And there it is. Exactly what we would expect to see. So where are all these haplogroups formed? The Fertile Crescent. Why not Africa? People have been living there for 200,000 years. Why are...
So when someone like Dan Stern Cardinal says, well, you have all this selection in mitochondrial DNA, and there's several studies where it shows the ratio of synonymous and non-synonymous mutations, and the ratio suggests that there has been selection in the mitochondrial DNA over time. And so that must mean that your mutation rate, your observed mutation rate, is a lot faster than the fixation rate, because a lot of those mutations are being weeded out. But if what you're saying is true, then maybe you can elaborate on this. If we were to assume that fixation is faster during that time period from the flood to the Babel dispersal, then we would still have, with selection in the mitochondrial chromosome, with fixation being slow today, of course, the observed mutation rate is still approximating the fixation rate, which means the fixation rate is still fast overall, which is biblical time. Can you expand on that, Matt? Or if any, go ahead.
That's why what happened in these numerical simulations that run based on population dynamics and growth rates and take everything into consideration, why they still get the biblical timeline of very early populations is what they do is they say, well, there must have been more inbreeding than was ever suspected. That's how they get around it in the evolutionary tree. But the problem that they run into is there's no genetic bottleneck in the evolutionary time frame around 6,500 years ago. So they run into a problem like, well, we don't know how mitochondrial Eve could have lived at that period of time, but there must have been more inbreeding than we suspected. But you got to remember, all people are everywhere on Earth 6,500 years ago in the evolutionary model. They're everywhere. It's full, even islands. So they left no trace of their existence, is what evolution wants you to believe. They stopped having children, or they died out and never intermingled again with the mitochondrial lineage that survived, because the mutation rates always go back to a single woman that lived just about 6,500 years ago in these pedigree mutation rate studies. And the reason they can go past the global flood is because the 3 women weren't related that were on the ark, and they already had different mitochondrial lineages. So that allows us to go past the flood to Eve. That's why we can do it with some animals as well, because some animals were clean, others were not. That's why their mutation rate can take us to the flood, and others go a little bit farther past that, like chickens, for example.
Yeah. And well, I'll ask you a couple of questions here. When it comes to these various studies, okay, in terms of mitochondrial DNA, adults with, let's say, mitochondrial defects or syndromes, are they put into different studies?
What was the question?
Were they put into different studies?
Yeah.
The mutation rates?
Well, then the studies we'd be looking at, because with Dan pointing to all this selection taking place.
Oh, yeah.
Looking at synonymous and non-synonymous mutations, let's if you're following me, adults with mitochondrial defects or syndromes, would they be put into different studies, as in basically what we're looking at? Isn't selection already accounted for?
Yeah, some are, not the early ones. In the early studies, they were added, like Lebranner syndrome or something, that were like the Howell did in the very first study. He was looking at people that had diseases, and he noticed a substitution rate that was almost identical anyway. And then for the most part, though, because that lineage would be weeded out from selection, they were counted anyway. So selection was accounted for in these studies, and they still got the same substitution rate that we're getting in all of the other pedigrees. So then they try to say, like, well, maybe these mutation rate studies aren't deep enough. They're not going farther enough back in time. And that's when I usually go to the animal studies, because we don't have that example in humans, right? Because if we had it, we would have to have the blood in humans of a complete lineage going back at what they want, like 50 generations. Well, that's a long time. We can't guarantee that, right? But we can in animals, and we have done it in animals. And when we look at chickens, this the mutation rate doesn't agree with the phylogenetic mutation rate whatsoever. It agrees with the biblical timeline of the faster mutation rate times 15. Exactly the same in human beings. And that's taking into account deep-rooted pedigrees with selection. So
and look at Sydney Raptor. Again, it's like evolutionary talking points bingo night,
yeah.
or Jeopardy, pick evolutionary rescue device, pick over here, and here's
there they are. One. There's the list of them. I've already answered. Remember from our
look
video.
at this one right here is such a low level one, and we will say, Sydney, we do appreciate the engagement, because having our critics here does give us a lot of fun, and it makes the programs that much more comprehensive. So, credit where credit is due, Sydney. So he says mitochondrial DNA most recent common ancestor is a calculated single female in a population. Oh yeah, that's your assumption. Prove that that's just a woman in a whole population. And I've already refuted you earlier, pointing out the fact that historically, if evolution is true, okay, you should find multiple mitochondrial DNA lineages, multiple Y chromosome lineages. Okay, no, here's a third challenge that Sydney's going to dodge. Dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge night for Sydney. Show me a prediction before we found the single mitochondrial DNA lineage and the single Y chromosome lineage. Show me a prediction from your side, okay? Send me a technical paper where they predicted this beforehand, or is this all retrofitted? this coalescence argument. Matt, go ahead, brother. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I always like to say this. If she's not the first woman, where is the evidence of all of these women? Because if you look it up, according to estimates, that around 6,000 years ago, the global was populated with 10 to 15 million people. Now, half of those would be women, right? Let's go with the low end. Now you have 5 million women alive 6,000 years ago. They left no trace. None. Where are they? What, you could say that they existed, but where are they? Without using evolutionary assumptions. And just go ahead, give any genetic evidence. They don't have any. So where did the 5 million women go? Why did they stop having kids? Why did they only have boys? You will never find an answer because they don't have it. They don't have an answer. Apparently, the world was full of women that never left any evidence that they even existed. So,
well, apparently Sydney's got the evidence. Sydney Raptor, let's just acknowledge the fact that I sent out the StreamYard link to you and just you over 30 minutes ago to come challenge us directly. And we've yet to see you join. Isn't that interesting? Because he knows he has no good answer to this. Prove to us that this is a woman in a greater population that fits the evolutionary story. I want to see that. Don't you, Matt?
Yeah, because the evolutionists themselves admit this. Isn't this a good one? Despite their allure, we must sadly conclude that all divergent estimates, that's right, diverging from common ancestors, discussed here are without merit. Our advice to the reader is whenever you see a timeline in the evolutionary literature, demand uncertainty. Why are they saying to question the evidence when you're not questioning the evidence? We are. We're showing you that there's a better answer to the evidence that we're reading. And you're saying, no, there's not. But they admit that you shouldn't even trust it in their own literature. Matter of fact, when you go to the Parsons study, he admits that the distribution of mitochondrial sequences, variation, and human migration that occurred only in the last 6,500 years. Listen to what he says right here. Clearly incompatible with the known age of modern humans.
Right.
So he believed in evolution, and he can't get out of his mind that millions of years is true because he's made his mind up that it must be, but the evidence says otherwise. So who's the science? Who's actual believing science and who's making it up?
Yeah, who's doing the real science and who's rejecting the real science? Well, these evolutionists, they're admitting, okay, the most recent common ancestor is about 6,000 years ago. They're forced because of their presuppositions, their evolutionary worldview. Okay, they're rejecting biblical creation and the clear implications of this data based on philosophy, their evolutionary philosophy, okay? They're not making these conclusions based on the empirical evidence because the natural conclusion is that, wow, all mitochondrial DNA worldwide is traced back to a single woman. What does the Bible say? Eve, the mother of all living. Adam, the first man. Both Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA suggest that that is true. What the Bible says is true. But remember, as you said, Matt, they go into these studies with evolutionary presuppositions. And those presuppositions, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, they are driving their conclusions here.
Right. Exactly. I mean, they kind of have to. Where are they going to get their government grant if they prove what they were set out to do was wrong?
Say goodbye to any future government grants. Imagine their conclusion. Evolution's false. The Bible's true. Yeah. That won't even get published.
No, it would be game over. It would be completely game over. And they admit in their own literature that the phylogenetic rate is the biased one. How do you think of that?
Right.
The evolutionary rate is probably biased, and the clear pedigree rates is a direct estimate of the mutation rate. I mean, you literally have to fight your own scientists again.
You know, Matt, we would probably be evolutionists if it wasn't for evolutionists. They make it so hard to take evolution seriously because their arguments are so weak. Their arguments are so outdated, and they reek of evolutionary bias. They don't know how to read between the lines. They don't know how to critically think when they read these papers. They just think the conclusions are gospel when they're not, as we can see here with Sydney Raptor, who is giving us so many gifts to creation science tonight, brother.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, they really want to believe that it's true. They're hooked. I mean, you learn it in school, and then you learn that it was wrong. You're just like, man, what a waste of time that was. And then imagine the person that's paid money to learn it again when they got out of school. Oh, horrible, horrible. So, I mean, it's just. Oh, by the way, and when we look over at animals, the same thing is true, and it's everywhere we look. They've thrown out a lot of rescue devices, but in that quest for Eve, I went through all of them, man. That was fun. That was good. But like you said earlier, statistical probability is where it really lies. When we look at the time frame of humanity, and when was the origin of math, and when the origin
Right.
of all history, when did they first start brewing beer? When did they first invent irrigation, and when did they radiometric date? All of these things land exactly as we would expect. How about
Right.
the
4 to
oldest
6,000.
living organisms? Same thing. I mean, why would we ignore all of this? I mean, how can it even be ignored to begin with? But how come it fits so perfectly if it's not true? Like I said, it's so easy to prove that it's wrong.
Every field correlates exactly.
Yeah.
Everything you talked about the fossils earlier. Why so few fossils? Take Erectus, right? Supposedly Erectus lives on the planet from between 1 to 2 million years. Okay, let's say their generation times 20 to 25 years, living on the earth for 1 to 2 million years. That's billions of dead bodies. Where's the grave sites? Where's all the fossils? Where's the evidence for their existence? We know they were sophisticated people. They knew how to sail. Okay, they would have had campsites, fire, but yet all the Erectus fossils that we have could literally be fit into the trunk of a car. Where's the evidence for the evolutionary story? Where's the evidence for their existence on the planet for a couple million years? The evidence isn't there. Everything you're showing here, historical records, origin of species, mutations, right, Matt? Isn't
Yep.
there a paper that talks about how all these rare SNPs, all these mutations today came about in the last 5,000 years?
Oh, you mean that right on the screen? Yeah. Oh, what are the odds? The rare nucleotide sequences, the SNVs, they just arose out of nowhere at exactly when we would expect Noah to get off the ark and deleterious mutations to arise and start sweeping through the population. Exactly when we said in the biblical timeline, published in the secular literature again, right? And then I like this one a lot. This is a fun one.
Right.
Always a classic. A classic.
Explain that one for the audience, Matt.
Okay, this is human beings supposedly have been around for, if you count Erectus, 2 million years, but they didn't invent the wheel or domestication or farming or music or agriculture, mathematics, a calendar, astronomy, medicine, herbalism, brewing, irrigation, granary. They didn't do anything. They waited until the last 5,000 years to do all of it worldwide at the same time from people groups that never met one another. And then they used the same math to build the same pyramids around the world. They used the same metric system. So they couldn't do any of this stuff, but it's all good. You know, they somehow managed to do other things. No problem. It's just, oh yeah. And population growth rate, 0
Matt,
that entire time.
Matt, I want to show you what an amazing, sophisticated rebuttal we got. Sydney Raptor dodging the StreamYard link for the last 45 minutes. That's the highlight of the show, buddy. So Sydney Raptor, here's the best they got. Not much to work with here, Matt. All this data that we're providing, offering all these technical papers, arguments directly from the conventional literature, sound numbers, and look what he says. And you are coping. Okay, thanks for your assertion. And trying hard. Okay, I could say the same to you. You're coping and trying hard. So far we got nothing to justify your misrepresentations. Okay, again, just an assertion, an opinion. We could say the same thing to him. Difference is we're actually providing numbers and empirical evidence and backing up everything we're saying. He says, especially your hijacking of mitochondrial most recent common ancestor. We already proved you wrong here comprehensively, Sydney. Okay, so more assertions. You know you are being disingenuous. Another meaningless assertion, we could turn that right around on him. No, Sydney, you are being disingenuous. You see, this is the best we get. And this right here is a good representation, Matt, of what we experience in the comment sections of our videos. These are the kinds of comments people like Sydney Raptor leave. and they think they won, making a bunch of assertions, dodging the evidence hard, not even responding to what we're saying. This is what we deal with, Matt.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's pretty common, but I mean, we've like pretty much covered everything you could possibly cover, going back like from study to study. We can go down the list to show that mitochondrial Eve goes back to a single female, and you can say that she's one of many, but we're showing you that all of the studies,
right?
Yeah, we're showing you that all of the studies take us back to a single female 6,500 years ago. You can say she's not the first, that's fine. But then we show you alternative evidence that also agrees with that same thing outside of genetics, outside of biology. We can show you in the history. We can show you in genealogies. We can show you in population growth rates. We can show you in the fossil record. We can show you pretty much everywhere you look that everything is going to this same area. And then to just say, well, it's not true because there were more. I mean, I don't even understand what to do with that. You know, it's like,
well, that's what I mean. There's not much you can do with a bunch of assertions other than point out that all you have are assertions. And so,
well, we did it with animals too. Okay. Well, the most recent common ancestor to all animals wasn't the first animal. Okay. Why did they go back just a few thousand years? Some animal must have lived for 100,000 years. A crocodile. Something had to have lived for at least 100,000 years, but yet its mitochondrial diversity is the same as humans. Why? Why is their most recent common ancestor the age of humans? Does that make any sense according to evolution?
Nope. It's a perfect match to biblical time, the Genesis account of origins. Matt, as we wrap up, we will have to dedicate a future video, or even I could respond to this.
Oh yeah, forgot about that one.
Yeah, well, we've had too much fun with our critics in the chat answering questions. For those that enjoyed this members only stream, let us know and we'll do more when Matt and I can, when our schedules are both convenient, right, brother Matt? We'll come together. We'll do these, because I don't know about you guys. I had a lot of fun tonight. Time has flown by. Matt and I could probably, if time allowed, and we had nothing else to do in life, we could do these for 10 hours. Now, so you and I, we will do hopefully another one somewhat soon and respond to these. But in a nutshell, okay, we don't have time to play these, but this so-called rebuttal, where this atheist, the skeptic, attempted to save the day for Forrest Valkai, because Forrest Valkai can't do it himself. He just runs to people like Gutsy Gibbon because he can't spar with the big boys in the creation versus evolution world, right, Matt? So this guy, atheist defends biologist from creationist corrections. The skeptic goes through like a tiny portion of my video, addresses nothing, misunderstands and misrepresents all the arguments, but spends most of the time scoffing at the Bible. These critics, these guardians of common descent, the idea that says humans and banana plants are related through common ancestry, they don't understand what we're saying when we start off with the biblical evidence. They scoff at the Bible. Oh, we don't care about the Bible. Oh, the Bible proves nothing. They don't understand the way the argument's being laid out. We are showing you what the Bible says. You can reject it all you want. That's fine. You'll answer for that one day. The point is, hey, here's what the Bible says. God created two first people, Adam and Eve, separate and independent from any other form of life. We get it. You don't believe the Bible. That's not the point. This is what the Bible says. Then we go into the scientific data and the scientific literature and prove that the science lines up beautifully and perfectly with what the Bible says. And so this entire 26-minute video was an epic fail and did not address anything at all. It was a gift to us and creation science. And then this video here with Bill, who is a skeptic, but he did, from my understanding, appreciate our work and program with Eric Hovind, Matt, on Creation Today, dealing with ERVs. He joins the line, okay, where these atheists get full control. Godless Engineer talks a big game, but even his own side admitted and continues to admit that Kent Hovind demolished him in their formal debate. Okay. And then Forrest Valkai during this section is like, oh, like, why would I ever debate? I mean, you know, there's others smarter than me that have already debated. And when it comes to Kent, everybody's already debated Kent. It's like, well, listen, your co-host here debated Kent, and your co-host's own side admitted that he lost and got demolished. Okay. If the atheists are admitting that says a lot. Secondly, Bill comes in, asks Forrest Valkai and Godless Engineer questions about ERVs, because Bill points out that you and I were on Eric Hovind's channel, and we absolutely wrecked ERVs. And these guys go, specifically Forrest Valkai, these guys specifically dodge all the arguments, refuse to engage the arguments, spend the first bit of time just explaining what retroviruses are and not really addressing anything. Yeah, any of us can do that. Okay. And so their response here on the line proved even further why their best so-called evidence, ERVs, have been absolutely overturned. Their best lines of evidence end up being some of the best points of evidence for creation. And this is why they can no longer uphold ERVs as a good argument anymore. Okay. And Forrest Valkai and Godless Engineer failed miserably to engage anything that I have said or you have said on the topic. Matt, what are your thoughts, brother?
Oh yeah. We listened to it briefly, and the same thing. They just make random. It's like they just go to Google, grab an answer, and they're like, "That's good enough." The audience won't understand anyway, so that's good enough. And just make assertions and then just kind of move on. You know, that's why we'll probably go back on Eric Hovind's and say, "Hey, you know, look at what happened." That'll be fun. Let's go back and say, "Look at the result that came from this." They don't even want to touch it.
They don't even want to touch it. Yeah.
It was so good because when I listened to it last night for the first time, Valkai was like, "Oh, I heard they made a long video of me. A lot of people kept sending me links to go respond to it, but I didn't even look at it." Oh, sure you did.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure you didn't.
Either he's lying or he just lost all credibility because he is unwilling to engage, which I pointed out in my video response to him on Adam and Eve. He's willing to engage our best arguments. He doesn't address our best arguments. And then he recommends Gutsy Gibbon. Okay. Gutsy Gibbon and I debated not too long ago for almost 2 hours on the Y chromosome.
I know. Okay. And she admits she doesn't even understand genetics and biology. So a topic that she doesn't understand, she's debunked us on. Think about that.
Well, it's a meaningless assertion from someone like Forrest Valkai. What it is an excuse to not actually have to engage with opposing arguments. Okay. I challenge any of these evolutionists. Let's see you save the day for real, not that joke of a section on the line video where they actually engage our point on endogenous retroviruses. In a separate video, I'll play through what they say to Bill, who specifically asks them about ERVs, and we'll respond and show everybody why they didn't actually address anything we said. They have no clue how to address all the amazing functional roles, especially the essential functional roles like embryological development. So anyways, yeah, Matt, we're coming up to 3 hours. I've had a lot of fun. I think we've had a lot of really good interaction with the live chat. Matt, you're currently, maybe we'll wrap it up with this. If you wanted to audibly give a bit of a teaser for your current project, the world before the global Genesis flood. We just put out the first official teaser trailer. So cool. And I'm pumped for it. Incredible images. This short film really is going to be the antediluvian period like you've never seen. Isn't that right, brother?
And it wasn't even supposed to be this. I'm literally making a study right now called The Days of Creation, and I'm going to show how the days of creation match the scientific evidence we have, and it's not backwards. And during making the visuals, I'm like, man, I've got an epic video I should make right now. It looks awesome. So I just kind of threw that together. And that's it. So it might end up being a long video, just like really cool looking. I don't really know yet.
So it might go from a short film to a full film.
Yeah, that's the goal. That's the goal anyway. But there's so many projects too. So I hope I can get to it.
Yeah, I mean, to the audience, we got a lot of things in the works. You talked about your one article. You still got 2 other ones too, shorter ones.
Yeah, they're finished already. And that was the third one I was working on, was the Days of Creation. So I know fourth. And the fourth one is the days of creation. And that's when I was like, oh, I'll turn this one into a video because it'll be visually stunning right now. And then while doing that, I was like, wow, I have another whole video I need to make, the antediluvian days. So I just keep making more projects for myself.
It's fun being a creationist, isn't it, brother?
It is, because you can literally come up with predictions on the fly, like just make something up. Because if creation is true, it's going to come to fruition, right? You can make predictions on Erectus because they haven't studied its genome at all. So I'm making predictions on what we're going to find, and it's going to be true. I'm like so excited for it to come out because it's only going to be in a couple years, and when it's true, what are the critics going to say? He got lucky. He's lying. I don't know. I don't even know.
Or you can just pull the Forrest Valkai. I didn't even watch it.
I didn't even watch. I don't even look at that content.
Yeah, like if imagine our side was set, like imagine somebody sent us a video, let's say from Gutsy Gibbon or Aaron Ra, a critic that was supposedly demolishing us, and we just said, oh, we're not watching, we're not dealing with that, waste of time. We would actually lose credibility. We're here to defend the Christian faith. We're here to engage the critics. Okay. So comments like that from people like Forrest Valkai actually shows the weaknesses in their position. The fact that a lot of what they say is indefensible. Their favorite lines of arguments like ERVs have been completely overturned and they don't know what to do. They're frantic.
Yeah.
All they can do is repeat the same talking points.
Oh, you guys are flat earthers. Oh,
yeah.
And leave.
Right.
That's all they got.
That's all they got, which is a whole lot of nothing.
Stupid questions over and over that have been answered so much. I literally have slides ready to go. It's so ridiculous. It's so
that
simple.
shows the power of our position where we can get a critic in the live chat putting forth a typical talking point. We do appreciate our critics. Don't get us wrong. And Matt, you're ready to go with like 40 slides refuting it.
Yeah. Matter of fact, look at this one. He just said, well, look at this. Well, what about the my most recent common ancestor calculated 100,000 years earlier? Good question. We're going to do that one real quick now too, because again, that came from the phylogenetic mutation rates. And if you actually go to the ones that were a pedigree germline mutation rate, you actually get 3 mutations per generation and not like this slow mutation rate, which was assumption based. See, what happened is what they had done with pedigree mutation rates is they just simply counted them on one scan. So meaning they scanned the 60 million base pairs and they counted each mutation. They're like, oh, that's probably how many there are. Well, guess what? Better technology came out and they got high sequencing data and they scanned it multiple times. They missed that many mutations, 3,343. That brought that slow mutation rate that was about 100 to 200,000 years ago right back to the biblical timeline about 4,500 years ago. And guess what? It was 10 times faster than the expected number from the pedigree mutation rate. Exactly the same thing we see when we go over to the high observed substitution rate of the mitochondria, which was 20-fold higher. Exactly the same thing. We find the fast mutation rates, and they go right back to biblical creation, which was, that's right, 440 total mutations in all people today. Takes us back 3 mutations per generation, 146 generations ago. That's not very long. With a 30-year generation time, that's 4,380 years ago. With a 35-year generation time, that's 5,100 years ago. It lands on the biblical timeline yet again. What are the odds of that? Statistical probability for the win. And we can count those gene mutations and go right back to when those haplogroups exploded right out of the Middle East. You can't beat that, can you? Boom!
Boom. Mic drop moment. For anybody who is open-minded and willing to look at the evidence in as objective as a way as possible. I understand everybody's got their presuppositions and worldviews, but if you actually look at this data and consider these answers and these points in an open-minded way, then you're going to be a biblical creationist, brother. There's no other way to look at this data. And so, Matt, I've enjoyed this, brother. We're going to have to do more of these because, you know, maybe the next one we'll do an Ask Us Anything, but live public, so we can get even more of our favorite critics in here, but this is good. I think this has been thorough, and we, for the most part, covered what we wanted to. We really did put that Neanderthal challenge to bed. It's done. We've dealt with it. To those in the audience, anybody brings up the Neanderthal challenge, send them this video. Perhaps we can just clip out that section and make it its own video. And Matt, any final words, my brother?
No, that was good. We went over, I've never really talked about my study out loud. I've only written it down. So that was fun to kind of go over and show how the evidence doesn't match evolution, like, at all. No matter how you try to rationalize it, it can't be justified. You can't, They can't fix it. I'll love to hear what the excuses are for why our ancestors are less similar to chimps than we are. Why isn't there mutation saturation when there should be over 7 million years of time? Where's the 7 million years of genetic diversity increasing? And why are we so similar when we shouldn't be? And why is genetic diversity so low when the mutation rate is so fast? Like, it's game over. Like, there's no reasonable explanations anymore. They've just kind of ran out. But we'll hear the same thing again. You know, it's just repeating, like you said. We'll hear the same answer that we heard last time. So we could just send them the same video we've already made.
That's actually a good heading or subtitle for this program for when we upload it publicly or advertise it.
Start with that.
It's game over. It's game over for the evolutionists. So Matt, excellent job, brother. Appreciate you doing this for a few hours. It really doesn't feel like a few hours, that's for sure. So we'll have to do this again sooner or later. To the audience, stay tuned. Matt and I, we are working on a ton. We are going to be releasing quite a few epic videos coming in the future. Matt's got several studies that we're working to publish soon, and Matt and I plan to be entering the debate arena again for some 2v2 debates. It's going to be fun, brother. You and I, we're going to have too much fun with those. So get ready, y'all. Matt, thank you. To the audience, thank you so much for tuning in. Until we meet again, Standing for Truth, team Standing for Truth is out.